Hello, everyone, and welcome to Invasive Species in Forestry, Impacts Management and Action in Ontario virtual training. My name is Sharon Yang, and I will be hosting today's webinar. On behalf of the Canadian Institute of Forestry, we are very pleased to collaborate with the team at the Invasive Species Centre to provide IT and hosting services for today's virtual training. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the lands on which we gather today are the traditional and unceded territories of Indigenous peoples who have cared for these lands for countless generations. We recognize and honor the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples across what is now known as Canada for their stewardship of the lands, waters, and skies. As professionals in forestry, we acknowledge the diverse cultures, languages, and traditions of Indigenous peoples that continue to influence these territories and their profound connections to the forests, waters, and ecosystems that sustain us. We're committed to learning from Indigenous knowledge and working towards reconciliation and respectful and sustainable stewardship of the land. Before we get started, there are a few important housekeeping notes. During the webinar, all the participants will be muted with the exception of the presenters and host. To share a comment or idea with the speaker and participants, please use the chat tool. You can click the chat icon in the Zoom toolbar, which is at the bottom of your screen. A chat window will appear on the right-hand side of the screen where you can type your message. Please post questions in the Q&A pod. If you prefer to ask your question verbally during the Q&A session, please use raise hand feature and we'll grant you access to speak. A reminder that you may see a red button on the top of your Zoom screen, which indicates that the session is being recorded for archival purposes. If you run into any technical issues, please email us at electures@cififc.org or send us a private message using the Zoom chat. A reminder that ISA certified arborists may be eligible to receive continuing education unit for attending the entire webinar. To receive the credit, please email electures@cififc.org with your full name and ISA certification ID. Once we verify your attendance, we'll submit your information to ISA for processing. All right, we have a great lineup of expert speakers today and a packed agenda that runs from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time with a lunch break from 11:35 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. This virtual training has 3 main sessions: invasive pests in Ontario forests, success in management, and horizon scanning, followed by a final Q&A and discussion. Let's get started. To kick things off, I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Madison Sturba, who will provide an overview with introduction to invasive species in forestry. Madison is the terrestrial invasive team lead at the Invasive Species Centre, where she guides a variety of projects related to invasive pests, disease, and plants. She graduated from the University of Windsor with a Master's of Science in Biology and an Honors of Bachelor's of Science in Behavior, Cognition, and Neuroscience. With that, I will now pass it over to Madison.
Thanks so much, Sharon. Appreciate the introduction. We're really excited to be here today and talk to you all about invasive species for the next few hours here. So Sharon gave a really great land acknowledgement. Since I'm the first presenter from the ISC, I'll give one too. We do acknowledge that the Invasive Species Centre honors the long history of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation peoples on the lands now known as Canada, and strives to show respect to their ancestors, their communities, and to them individually. Our head office is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Bechuana, and Garden River First Nations, as well as the longtime settlement of the Métis people in the Robinson Huron Treaty area. The Indigenous peoples are the traditional stewards of the lands and waters where each of us attends the workshop this morning. So I encourage you to take some time after the meeting to learn more about the peoples and land in your area. So we're all with the Invasive Species Centre, and just in case you aren't familiar with us, we're a not-for-profit organization that mobilizes action against invasive species that harm the environment, economy, and society. So this is our head office here. It's located in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. So we have a lot of staff there, but we also have a bunch of staff kind of working remotely across the province. So for me, for example, I am tuning in today from the Windsor-Essex area in Ontario. So let's kick off this workshop learning more about what defines an invasive species. That way we're all on the same page moving forward. So something is considered invasive when it meets two basic criteria. The first is that it's introduced to an ecosystem outside of its native range. And the second is that it has the potential to cause ecological, economic, or social harm in this new area. So just because a species is introduced to a new area doesn't automatically mean it's invasive. Sometimes the species gets brought over here and they're just incompatible with this new environment. So maybe it's too cold, or maybe there's not enough food, for example, so they're not really able to establish and spread. There are other times when species get brought over and they actually integrate really well and don't really pose a risk to the environment like invasives do. So an example that comes to mind for that would be food crops like wheat or corn. They were introduced here intentionally and they become really important food sources for a ton of different people. So just because the species isn't from here doesn't mean it's invasive. It really has to have that sort of harmful impact component as well. We can kind of see that here with these three photos. So all the pictures here look very similar, but they're actually completely different species. So the first we have is dill. It's in the left-hand photo there. It's a non-native garden herb that supports pollinators like black swallowtail. It doesn't exhibit the aggressive traits as an invasive species does. So this non-native plant, it stays relatively contained and is often actively managed. You can see a little caterpillar from a black swallowtail there on this native plant as well. So in contrast to that, we have wild parsnip. This is in the top right photo. This is a plant that was introduced to gardens, but it escaped cultivation and it spread really rapidly across open habitats. It outcompetes native plants, it reduces biodiversity. It does also pose a risk to human health just because it has some toxic sap. So it is invasive compared to the non-native dill. And though wild parsnip is also a swallowtail host, it doesn't really offer any additional ecological value. So what the heck did important species like black swallowtail eat before non-native dill was introduced, or before wild parsnip? One of these species is native golden Alexanders, which you can see in the bottom right photo. So this native plant not only supports black swallowtail larvae, but also provides resources for a large range of different pollinators, including things like mining bees and the Ozark swallowtail. So there are gardeners who have both dill and golden Alexanders in their garden, and they've reported that important species like swallowtails have largely ignored the non-native dill, and they do prefer more native species. So all to say, non-native species aren't automatically harmful. They really have to be, causing some sort of ecological, economic, or social harm to be considered invasive. So how are species like wild parsnip good at dominating their new introduced areas? They do have a lot of common characteristics that native species don't really have. So for example, invasive species tend to be fast growing and reproducing species. Some plants, for example, can release hundreds or even thousands of seeds into the environment all at once. So there's a lot of potential there for growth. Invasive species also tend to lack natural predators that would slow their spread, and they do tend to target native species that lack defense mechanisms. So there's nothing here that can really control their populations. Invasive species also have an increased tolerance and adaptive capacity in new conditions. So they do really well in different climates. Like we said earlier, invasive species are outside of their native range. So these species can come from really anywhere in the world to end up here in Canada. They can come from far away places, like from places in Europe or Asia, or they can even come elsewhere in Canada. So for an example of this would be a species that's native to British Columbia on the west coast. It's the mountain pine beetle, but as it moves because of climate and different changes in human activity, it can become invasive in its new range. So it would be native, not harming anything over on the west coast, but if it were to make its way here, that's when we can see those invasive tendencies. We do have a lot of laws in Canada to try and prevent the arrival of invasives and to prevent its domestic spread. But even though we have a lot of these types of import and phytosanitary requirements, for example, we still do sometimes get new invasives. So how are they spreading? There is unfortunately a lot of possible ways for them to be introduced to a new area and to continue spreading in that area as well. So they can spread by natural means through factors we can't really control, like animals or the weather. Birds are a really great example of this because a few different invasive species actually rely on birds to travel longer distances. One really great example of this is hemlock woolly adelgid, which is a tiny little insect that feeds on hemlock trees. They surround their eggs in this white fuzzy wool, and it can kind of act like Velcro and stick to passing birds. So those birds will pick up those eggs and kind of spread them out as they go along. So these sorts of natural means of spread are common, but oftentimes invasive species are actually spread by humans. So we can spread them through transportation on land or in water. Invasive species eggs or spores, for example, can spread in the soil. They can be transported by the wheels or body of heavy machinery. They're commonly spread on vehicles like four-wheel drives, excavators, tractors, loaders, water trucks, really anything you can think of. One really great example of this is spotted lanternfly, which is found in the United States, and they really like to lay their eggs on any hard surfaces. So they could lay their eggs on your car, and you could carry it with you without even realizing. So there are some really good hitchhiking invasive species. Another big way that invasive species spread is through recreational activities like camping or hiking. So for example, invasive plants can drop their seeds in the soil, and if you step in that soil or mud, you can transport those seeds on the bottom of your shoes. So when you're done, walking or hiking on trails, just try and brush off your boots to really avoid transporting any of those seeds or insect parts. Firewood is a huge concern because it's something that invasive species can hide really easily in. You never really know what's underneath the bark, so you could be transporting invasive species. Ontario is a particular hotspot for invasives. We do have more invasives here than any other province or territory, and there's a few different reasons for that. The first is that we're very close to the United States, where generally we have a lot of international travel and trade, especially through the Great Lakes. The busiest Canada-US border is the Ambassador Bridge, which connects Detroit and Windsor. And usually on average, that sees about 10,000 commercial vehicles on a typical weekday. So it's just a ton of people moving back and forth with a lot of potential to spread or introduce invasive species. Another reason for our high invasive species count here in Ontario is our diverse geography. So we have different types of forests and environments throughout the province, from the boreal forest in the north to the Carolinian forest in the south. So there's a lot of different potential habitat here. We do have some legislation in Ontario specifically to try and help prevent invasive species. So we have the Invasive Species Act. It was enacted in 2015, and then it was amended in 2022, and then again recently last year in 2024. So this act really just provides a framework for identifying, classifying, and managing invasive species in the province. So as of last year, we now have 28 species that are prohibited, meaning it's completely illegal to import them, transport them, possess, or release them anywhere in Ontario. And then we have 15 species that are restricted. So it's illegal to import or release them anywhere in Ontario. All this kind of information is available online. There's lists of all these different species and what this means, but all the that there is legislation to try and help prevent invasive species. Despite all the things we do to have, try and prevent these arrivals, we still do have impacts in forests in Ontario and throughout Canada. So there are a couple different types of forests we can keep in mind that are impacted by invasive species. So the first is the urban forest, and this is really any green space or street tree in a city or town. It's all the flora and fauna found lining the streets and in parks and in your own backyard. And while these trees are absolutely beautiful. Their purposes do go far beyond the aesthetic. So these types of street trees really provide, millions of dollars worth of cost-saving benefits in things like energy costs and property value, things like that, water quality. Unfortunately, though, we do tend to find forest pest outbreaks in the urban forest first. That's just where we have a lot more human activity, more eyes on the ground. The natural forest is that dense woodland that's largely undisturbed. Invasive forest pests can spread really rapidly in these spaces where there's a large number of trees with no real natural predators or, host defenses. We also have the working forest, and that's often found within the natural forests. These forests are actively managed for revenue, and they're incredibly important to Canada's economy. So let's look at a few examples of how invasives impacted the urban forest specifically. So our first culprit is Dutch elm disease. This is a fungal disease that infects and kills elm trees. The fungus will grow in the tree and block the transport of water and nutrients, causing the leaves to wilt and the tree to die. It spreads with the help of bark beetles. So bark beetles will be hanging out under the bark of a weak or dying elm tree to breed. And if that tree is infected with Dutch elm disease, it'll come into contact with those fungal spores. Those spores will stick to their bodies and they'll kind of carry those spores with them and possibly introduce them to new healthy trees. So what you're seeing here in this picture, in this mugshot, is the damage under the bark. So an adult beetle will tunnel under the bark to lay eggs. Those eggs will hatch into larvae. The larvae will tunnel and feed, and they'll eventually turn into adults. So all of these galleries are damage caused by an insect. This disease can cause some pretty widespread damage. It was first found in Ontario in 1946, and it spread pretty quickly because there was a lot of hosts. Elm was a really popular street tree for a number of reasons. They have really great shade with their larger canopies. They do really well in a variety of soil and urban conditions. They grow quickly, that sort of thing. And then of course they look good. Unfortunately, though, there is no cure for Dutch elm disease. So trees that became infected needed to be cut down. So if your neighborhood or local park was dominated with elms, then it did start to look quite bare. Trees that were removed from Dutch elm disease were sometimes replaced with other desirable trees like ash or maple. And that leads into our second culprit, emerald ash borer. These are a wood-boring beetle that really infest all species of ash. It was detected in Ontario in the early 2000s for the first time, and it spread pretty quickly since then. When it was found, no one really knew what exactly it was or where it came from. But once we kind of figured it out, it was too late to start eradicating. And one of the reasons it was able to spread so quickly in the landscape was, again, because of the abundance of host trees. There were ash everywhere. So it was a really common tree. The beetles really wiped them out in a lot of places. So you can kind of see through these examples here the impact that invasive species can have in the urban forest. They can really change what the streets look like, how people feel in their communities, and you can see very similar types of changes to different types of forests too, like the natural forests. There's a lot of different reasons why there was such extensive damage in those pictures in the previous slide. There's usually lots of different factors to consider, but here's a few. So the first is that these streets, like I said, were generally lined with one or two types of tree species. So there's really limited diversity, a ton of available hosts. This limited diversity really means that invasive species can spread quite quickly if the trees present happen to be good hosts for them. So by planting a variety of tree species throughout the city or throughout your woodlot, you can ensure that even if one species is affected, others will hopefully remain healthy and continue to provide ecological benefits. Another factor is lower tree resilience. So any type of stressor can really weaken trees and make them susceptible to other pests or problems. That's especially the case with spongy moth. It's a defoliator species, and here in this picture, it doesn't usually kill the tree themselves, but they do place a lot of stress on the trees. And this type of stress on these trees makes it harder for them to fight off different types of insects or infection, things like that. So it makes them more susceptible to mortality. Increased stress from things like storms can also really impact tree health and make them more susceptible to invasives. Unfortunately, invasive species interceptions and introductions are likely to get worse over time as conditions change. So in Canada, we used to be able to rely on our colder climate to kind of keep these types of invasive species away. but that's not entirely the case nowadays, unfortunately. We are seeing milder winters and warmer summers, which is really changing the way that species interact with their environment as things become more favorable. So in the future, I think we're more likely to see species that are already here expanding their range into areas they previously couldn't occupy. And that's what this graph is showing. It's showing the idea of sleeper species, which are non-native species that are already present here. They're not causing any sort of damage right now, but they have the potential to be invasive. Maybe they're being limited right now by things like climate or other species. So over time, as things start to become more favorable, these species can kind of awaken and start to, grow rapidly and expand their range. Increasing public awareness will be really important for prevention and early detection. So attending events like this and getting to know more about invasive species and how to, monitor them and report them is really helpful. There are a lot of different species we're worried about when it comes to forests in Canada. These are just a few of the insects, plants, and diseases that come to mind. If you're interested in learning more about any of these species or lots of other ones, you can check out our species profiles on the Invasive Species Center's website. We have lots of different profiles. They're all like little mini deep dives into these species, so you can learn lots more. I thought I would wrap up this talk with just general resources, since I'm not sure we'll get to it at any other point in the day here. We do have a lot of different resources on the Invasive Species Center's website that you can access whenever you want if you want to learn more about invasive species. So we have a lot of free resources. We have like fact sheets and newsletters. We have best management practices, like I mentioned, those species profiles. If you ever see a resource that we don't have that you think would be really great, you can always reach out as well, and we're happy to look into that. We host a free webinar series each month, and we post the recording on our YouTube channel. We invite experts to come and talk about, all things invasive species related. So you can always check out our YouTube channel for that. We do have training courses that are really in depth, really for anybody wanting to learn more about invasive species. We do have 4 forest-related courses, and if you are an ISA certified arborist, you can receive continuing education units by completing those courses. I just want to quickly, as a last little slide here, plug our municipal community practice. This is a group that's exclusive to Municipal Conservation Authority and First Nations staff. So it's really just a group that lets you connect with other people that are also managing invasive species, maybe going through same troubles that you are, have the same questions as you do. So this is a great group to connect, share knowledge, and increase collaboration. So if you're part of one of those groups and you want to join, you can reach out and check that out on our website. And this is my contact information. I'm giving a few other talks throughout the day, so you'll see this quite a bit, but I'm happy to take questions now, or you can reach out anytime through email.
Thank you, Madison, for setting the stage for a clear overview of how invasive species affect our forests and the broader ecological and economic implications. Up next, let's welcome Monica Liedtke, who will speak on invasive plants in your woodlot. Monica is a terrestrial invasive plants coordinator at the Invasive Species Centre and environmental conservationist with a deep passion for protecting and restoring natural spaces. She specializes in urban forestry and invasive species management and is an ISA certified arborist. She has spent many muddy, booted hours removing unwelcome plants from beloved natural areas, where she has led invasive species monitoring, ecological restoration, and community engagement efforts. Her work bridges science and stewardship, blending field expertise with a genuine passion for nurturing the land. Monica brings curiosity, care, and a people-focused approach to her work, believing that meaningful change happens when communities feel connected to the ecosystems around them. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you, Sharon. So as Sharon mentioned, my name is Monica, and I am the Terrestrial Invasive Plants Coordinator at the Invasive Species Center. And today I will be speaking about invasive plants in your woodlots. So I'll generally be following this format where I introduce the plant, give a few identification features, then get into the impacts that plant has to the economy, ecology, or society, then get into a few ways to manage the species, followed by its current known distribution. So we've heard how invasive species can have very real and visible impacts, everything from damaging infrastructure, posing health risks, and pushing out native plants. But there's another layer to that story, and it's one that is harder to see, but just as critical. And Daniel Jason says there is a much more insidious kind of extinction, the extinction of ecological interactions. So when invasive species enters an ecosystem, they don't just take up space, they interrupt relationships. So he warned that the quiet unraveling of these relationships is the most dangerous kind of extinction. So you can think of it like this. Native plants rely on native insects to pollinate them. Birds and mammals rely on those plants for food and shelter. And when an invasive plant replaces a native one, it may not support the same insects or animals, even if it looks healthy and green to us. Over time, the ecosystem loses its ability to function as a whole, and the loss isn't always visible right away, but it's happening in the spaces between the species. So in the interactions that keep energy flowing and life cycling through the system. So invasive species, they do impact interaction diversity. And that's why managing invasive species isn't just about what we remove, but it's also what we protect and restore. So now that we've looked at how invasive species disrupt the invisible threads holding ecosystems together, let's ground that idea in a real world example. One of the most widespread and ecologically damaging invasive plants in our region is common buckthorn, and its impact is a perfect case study of those disrupted relationships in action. So common buckthorn is a woody shrub native to Europe, which is why it is often called European buckthorn. It's incredibly hardy, tolerating both shade and drought, and it thrives just about anywhere. So you can think roadsides, fence lines, woodland edges, and even in pastures and abandoned fields. It can reach heights up to 6 to 7 meters tall, but usually caps out around 3 meters. And one of the easiest ways to spot buckthorn is by its timing. So it's often one of the first plants to leaf out in spring and holds onto its leaves well into the fall, long after many native plants have dropped theirs. Other identifying features include the leaves that are sharp and pointed and often curved or folded and have somewhat finely rounded teeth along the edges. Leaves have 3 to 5 strongly curved veins that are even more obvious on the underside where they arch towards the tip of the leaf. And the flowers are small, greenish yellow, and they grow in dense clusters. And the fruit is black when mature and green when it's immature, as you can see in the photo there. And the mature branches will end in a sharp thorn or terminal spine. And if you strip back a small section of the bark, you will see that the cambium layer is orange. So berries from invasive shrubs like buckthorn, even multiflora rose and autumn olive, that may all seem very abundant, but they offer the wrong kind of nutrition. They're loaded with, and nutrition to birds. They're loaded with sugar containing less than 1% fat, and that's a serious problem for both migrating and overwintering birds. So in the fall, birds either they need to fuel for long flights or build fat reserves to survive the winter, and they rely on native berries like those from arrowwood, poison ivy, and Virginia creeper, which are all very high in fat and energy rich. And when an invasive shrub replaces native ones, birds often have no other choice. But research shows that they do notice a difference. So birds tend to avoid habitats dominated by invasive shrubs and Instead, they will linger where native food sources are abundant. And another point to mention about the berries is that they act as a laxative when ingested. So many birds will eat them and then immediately excrete the berries in the seed. And this, of course, it contributes to the spread of the shrub. So the berries, they do not stay long enough in the digestive system, basically for any nutrition to be captured. So here again, we see that Daniel Jason warned us about. It's that quiet extinction of ecological interactions, right? So we're not just watching shrubs spread, we're watching essential bird-plant relationships unravel, and it's shifting the nutritional foundation of the ecosystem. And I want to also mention that buckthorn seeds, they typically persist in the soil for only 2 to 3 years. And this is a relatively short-lived seed bank, which is encouraging for new and ongoing restoration projects. But the impacts of buckthorn, it doesn't stop above ground. Beneath the surface, it changes the very soil our native plants depend on by shifting nitrogen levels and disrupting conditions that many species rely on. So for example, pincherry and chokecherry, whose berries do provide benefits to native wildlife, they have difficulty surviving due to the soil chemistry. And common buckthorn seems to have a direct impact on understory plant communities and vegetation types. As I mentioned, choking out vegetation for resources such as sunlight and alterations to soil chemistry. And this can impact the forest industry as buckthorn forms dense, even age stands dominating the understory. And then once established on the edge of the forest, it will begin to spread into the interior. And again, as I mentioned, by developing its leaves weeks before native tree species and then losing them weeks after, it effectively outcompetes forest regeneration, which is particularly harmful to hardwood forests, and it makes it difficult for land managers to promote healthy forest growth and succession. Now, in terms of management, when the soil is moist, small plants up to 1 meter or 3 feet in height, it can be pulled. Larger plants can be dug out or pulled out using a weed wrench tool. Resprouting can occur unless all the roots are removed or other measures like fire or chemical control are used. If pulling takes place in the fall, care should be taken to remove and contain the branches with the berries prior to pulling. And there are benefits of pulling in the fall winter season right before the ground freezes, since leaves remain on the stem and are green longer, which makes identification easier. And most of the ground vegetation has gone dormant at this time as well. So this reduces the disturbance to surrounding native plants. Cutting or girdling are also feasible control options. However, herbicide must be applied to fresh stumps or girdled areas to prevent resprouting. Mowing will reduce stem numbers and vigor and will eventually kill off most seedlings. Chemical is an option, but needs to be done in accordance with the Pesticide Act. And an innovative approach is target grazing. So in certain areas, goats are being used to control invasive shrubs like buckthorn. They are especially effective in dense or hard to reach sites, reducing biomass and making follow-up removal much more manageable. And they also bring a lot of public attention and curiosity to restoration efforts, which can be a great learning tool. So in Canada, buckthorn is found from Nova Scotia to Alberta. In Ontario, it is widespread across here in Southern Ontario and found in many northern communities as well. So now we'll turn our attention to dog strangling vine. Dog strangling vine, also known in short form DSV, it might sound a bit dramatic, but this invasive plant really does live up to its name in the sense that it is a very aggressive plant. It is also known as European swallowwort, which actually refers to two invasive plants native to Eurasia, black swallowwort or pale swallowwort. And you might not realize it at first, but dog strangling vine species are members of the milkweed family. So this climbing plant, it will twine itself around its stems, reaching up to 2 meters, wrapping itself around other plants, and then even toppling them under its own weight. The leaves are smooth, oval to oblong shapes and can have wavy edges. In summer, you'll see clusters of 5 to 20 small flowers that range from like a red, a brown, almost to like a maroon or a pinkish color. Then in late July and August, the fruits will form in long, slender pod-like fruits, just like in the picture there. And these pods contain a milky sap and turn green to light brown as they grow. They split open when they're ready to release the seeds, and the seeds are attached to feathery tufts of hair that help them. It helps with wind dispersal. And this is just one way that this plant spreads so aggressively. So some invasive species don't just disrupt plant communities, they rewrite the rules of how ecosystems develop. Dog strangling vine is a prime example of this. So in healthy landscapes, we expect a natural succession where we see grasslands maturing into meadows and then forests. But where dog strangling vine takes hold, that progression collapses. It locks ecosystems into this like a stagnant, tangled state. It's crowding out native plants and blocking that recovery process. And here's a really nice photo of what that looks like. It's been said that dog strangling vine spreads like wildfire. So it can form this extensive monospecific stands that outcompete native plants for space, water, and nutrients. It creates heavy shade and produces chemicals through allelopathy that alter ecosystem structure and function. Dog strangling vine threatens rare vegetation communities such as alvars, tall grass prairies, oak savanna, and oak woodlands, as well as their associated species. Dog strangling vine can also affect insects. So in particular, the monarch butterfly that rely on native milkweed when laying eggs. So butterflies mistakenly lay eggs on dog strangling vine instead of their true host. And the monarch larvae then starve because it doesn't provide the necessary food source. And this could lead to further declines in the population of the monarch, which is already listed as a species of special concern in Ontario and Canada. And this goes back to what Daniel Jason noted, that the most insidious form of extinction is the loss of ecological interactions. In dog strangling vine, it really exemplifies this by disrupting the critical relationship between monarch butterflies and milkweed. So it's luring monarchs to lay eggs on a plant their caterpillar just can't survive on. In forests, dense patches of this plant suppresses native tree seedlings, young saplings, and woodland ground cover plants due to that heavy shading and can negatively affect forest regeneration. And because dog strangling vine can invade and dominate the understory of mature forest, it is, of course, again, just like buckthorn, it's particular concern to woodlot owners. Dog strangling vine can also inhibit recreational activities in areas where it has become established, as these dense, tangled mats, as you can see, of vegetation are difficult to walk through, bike through, and pets can also get tangled in the vines as well. My dog has got stuck in it before. Yeah, in winter, even in winter, the dead stems remain and can hinder activities like skiing and snowshoeing along trails as well. As for management, you want to focus on areas where dog strangling vine is just beginning to spread or where native ecosystems are most vulnerable. Containing the edges and protecting high value areas first is more effective than starting in a dense established patch. But regardless of control method used, replanting the area with native vegetation will help to suppress resprouting and assist in preventing new invaders from establishing. Digging up the root crown is a viable eradication measure for small populations and can be more effective than hand pulling or pesticide use. It's important to follow up to ensure seedlings aren't growing from old seeds and that all plants parts were removed. Mowing can allow the plant to resprout rapidly and potentially still produce flowers and seeds. However, properly timed mowing can be an effective way to reduce the amount of seed that is produced, even though it will not eradicate the population. For smaller infestations, selective clipping of plants later in the growing season can provide an effective reduction in seed production. Clipping should be done just after the plants flower and before seed pods are produced. Pulling removes above ground vegetation and can prevent seeds from forming. However, the stems breaks pretty easily when pulled. When that happens, it leaves the root crown in place. So pulling is not recommended as the plant will send multiple shoots from the root fragments. And if the entire root system is not removed, dog strangling vine can resprout often more aggressively. Tarping, that refers to covering an invasive plant population with a dark material to block sunlight and cook the root system. Tarping is not recommended in low light areas. Tarping is most effective when started in late spring and continued through the growing season, and is a viable control method for medium to larger infestations. And this method is also best for those monocultures as to not kill, native plants. And when manual control is not an option, chemical control is the most effective method for managing larger populations. So dog strangling vine, it is found in parts of Ontario, southern Quebec, in several American states, as the map shows. It's very abundant in urban settings throughout southern Ontario. More recently, dog strangling vine has also spread into rural and natural environments, and it has also been reported as far north as Temagami. So the last species we'll have a look at is Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is native to Eastern Asia and was introduced to North America as a horticultural plant in the late 1800s. Unfortunately, while it was once praised for stabilizing riverbanks, it doesn't hold soil as effectively as native plants with deeper, denser root systems. If you've ever heard of it being called bamboo, that's because its stems are hollow and it does resemble bamboo canes. The plant has alternating green lobed leaves and produces sprays of white-green flowers in late August. While seeds rarely germinate, Japanese knotweed spreads aggressively through rhizomes. So they have an intricate root system up to 5 meters deep, which makes this plant particularly difficult to manage. So a couple of years back, I saw some honeybees actively foraging on Japanese knotweed in bloom. And then later in a webinar on invasive plants and pollinators, a beekeeper did confirm what I witnessed, that honeybees, they love Japanese knotweed. But seeing pollinators visit a plant doesn't mean that plant is good for the ecosystem. As Doug Tallamy explains in Nature's Best Hope, native is not a label a species earns after a certain amount of time, but a measure of how well it functions within an ecosystem. A plant is truly native when it supports the same ecological productivity it did in its evolutionary homeland, providing food, shelter, and interaction for insects, birds, and predators that rely on it. So even after decades in North America, Japanese knotweed supports only a fraction of life it does back in its native range. So like Phragmites, which is another invasive species, for example, Phragmites, it supports around 170 insect species in Europe, so back in its home range. But here in Canada, it only has about 5 insect species. So knotweed is the same thing. It fails to create that deep-rooted relationships that make ecosystems resilient. And while honeybees, which are themselves not native to North America, may benefit from its nectar, this interaction is quite shallow compared to the network of specialized roles fulfilled by native plants. Invasive species like knotweed replace this complexity with a simplified system, ultimately weakening ecological integrity. So to truly understand the consequences of invasive species like knotweed, we need to look at the broader environmental impacts it has on ecosystems. So once established, Japanese knotweed can severely impact wetlands and riparian habitats. It creates these dense thickets that reduce sunlight and sunlight penetration by more than 90%. And its thick mats of dead and decaying vegetation in fall and spring prevent other species from growing by shading them out. The roots also contain unique compounds which may alter soil chemistry or prohibit the growth of nearby native species. And if that all is not enough, it's notorious for damaging infrastructure. So its roots are capable of growing through asphalt and concrete up to 8 centimeters thick and even building foundations. The Japanese knotweed, it can block or interfere with access to water for activities such as canoeing, boating, angling, and swimming, and it can easily and quickly take over an area, including public parks and walking trails. And I have a perfect example of this right here. So this is a walking trail in Sault Ste. Marie, and almost all of the green leaves that you see in this picture is Japanese knotweed. It looks like a jungle just because of how tall and dense it can grow and quickly start to encroach on a trail. Managing this plant comes with many challenges and may require contractors. For starters, the root system is very prolific, and the rhizomes, which it uses to reproduce, makes up 2/3 of the entire plant's biomass and can extend more than 5 meters deep and 18 meters in length. So even a 1 centimeter root fragment can reproduce and grow into a full plant. And because of this, complete root removal is critical for long-term success. In fact, in the United Kingdom, developers must dispose of soil containing knotweed fragments at hazardous waste facilities in an effort to try and control the spread of this plant. If you have a small population containing less than 15 plants, you may be successful managing using only manual efforts such as mowing, cutting, and digging, especially if it's coupled with tarping. However, if a population consisting of greater than 15 plants, that may require chemical control, such as stem injections or foliar spray to successfully manage. And there's more research coming out right now about the management of Japanese knotweed. So we're still learning despite its presence in Ontario. Now, seeing this distribution map, it really surprised me. I didn't expect to see it so widely spread across North America, but you can see here that it's certainly becoming more of a problem and not just here in Ontario. Now, when managing invasives, you want to make sure you are also planning for proper disposal. So you want to place all plant parts in construction grade garbage bags and then leave it on a hard surface, such as a deck, a driveway, or even a trailer for at least 1 week to allow the sun to bake the plants and then completely kill them before disposing them at a landfill. Maddie mentioned this in her presentation. The biggest asset to you, it's going to be the best management practice database on our website. It's also short form for BMPs. It's going to go into far more detail than I did today, and it will help you cater your management strategies to your specific site, your population size, and your non-target species present, and so much more. So be sure to check those out before planning any control efforts. And lastly, if you are a gardener, this is a Grow Me Instead guide by the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. It's a great resource to help determine which native species to plant in place of invasive plants that you remove out of your garden, which many of them are still also found in garden centers. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, for walking us through the identification, impacts, and management strategies for some of the most common invasive plants in Ontario woodlots. Now let's welcome Vincent Tassa, who will share a case study on emerald ash borer and black ash, safeguarding a species at risk. Vincent is a program development coordinator at the Invasive Species Centre who works predominantly with terrestrial and forest invasive species. In his role, he coordinates and participates in public outreach events and the development of educational resources. He leads the ISC's Emerald Ash Borer and Ash Trees Preservation Project, a new initiative with the goal of mitigating the impacts of the emerald ash borer on surviving ash trees, with a focus on black ash, a species at risk. Vincent, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you everyone for joining today. I'm really excited to give an overview of the emerald ash borer, discuss a little bit about black ash, and the importance of safeguarding this species at risk here in Ontario, and the initiative that the Invasive Species Centre is currently doing to protect this species from further decline. So just an overview of the presentation. So like I mentioned, I'm going to be giving an introduction to the emerald ash borer, and then to the black ash tree. Going to discuss a little bit about invasive species and the connection between them and species at risk. Black ash is a species at risk, and then the importance of seed collection for black ash preservation. Again, our latest community science initiative, and then what's next and how you can help. So the emerald ash borer, this is an invasive species that hopefully many people are familiar with. It's one that's been present now for quite some time, but it is an invasive wood boring beetle that is native to northeastern Asia, and it was believed to be introduced through infested wood packaging material in the 1990s, but it was first detected in 2002, at least in Canada, in the Windsor area, Windsor, Ontario. So it is one of the most damaging invasive insects ever to reach Canada. It's detected in 5 provinces and in more than 30 states in the United States. So it attacks all species of ash trees in North America, those including white ash, green ash, black ash, pumpkin, and blue ash. So it has killed millions of trees in both natural forests and in urban areas. And it causes large-scale mortality within 4 to 10 years upon its arrival. And it's a species that has proven both very difficult and very costly to manage in many cases in different municipalities where there have been severe infestations and the loss of many ash trees. It's up into the millions of dollars to properly dispose of, remove and dispose of. So I'm just quickly going to go over the life cycle of the emerald ash borer. So typically mating of the ash borer occurs between July and August. From there, they will fly onto the bark of an ash tree and lay their eggs onto the bark of the ash tree within cracks and crevices and between the bark scales. And this usually occurs between August and September. From there, the eggs will hatch, and the larvae that emerge from the eggs, they will burrow underneath the bark of the tree into the directly underneath the bark of the tree into the living tissue. And from there, they will begin feeding through that living tissue of the tree, and they form these characteristic S-shaped serpentine-like galleries. And as that occurs, it actually cuts off and disrupts the flow of nutrients from the roots up to the leaves of the tree. But yeah, so that's required for them to develop, and that usually takes between August and to April. So in more southern, warmer climates, that could be a year process, but in northern regions where there are cooler climates, it could take up to 2 years as they remain and develop as larvae before they then pupate into adults. And that pupation occurs between May and June, and then from there they will chew their way out from inside of the tree out towards the outer portion of the bark, and they will leave these characteristic D-shaped exit holes. And from there they will fly out from the tree, typically in June, but can continue into July, and then they will start the life cycle all over again. So this is just a really great diagram that illustrates that process. So some signs and symptoms of the emerald ash borer to be aware of. So like I had mentioned, the one that is most recognized the one that is most recognized and one that we focus on a lot is that characteristic serpentine, those feeding galleries that are found directly underneath the bark of the tree. So typically if there is an ash tree that is infested with the emerald ash borer, you'll notice some of the bark peeling back. And if you were to actually take some of that bark and start to peel it back, you'll notice these S-shaped galleries. Moving on to the other one here, you'll see those characteristic D-shaped exit holes as the adults emerge from the tree, and so you'll see those little holes in the bark of the tree. If you're looking at an ash tree, it'll have an overall unhealthy appearance. There will usually be leaves missing from the top of the tree or from different parts. It's something that we refer to as branch flagging as well. You can see some of the lower branches that are leafless. So just that overall unhealthy looking appearance to the tree. Oftentimes in a tree that is stressed from infestation of the emerald ash borer, you'll see what we refer to as epicormic shoots. So they're fast-growing branches that occur from the trunk of the tree and growing outwards. So typically, if you see a tree that's heavily infested, you'll see a lot of these smaller branch-like structures growing from the trunk further down. And then another symptom as well, so bark cracking, like I had mentioned. So as the larvae of the emerald ash borer feed underneath the tree and starve the tree of water and nutrients, it'll often cause the bark on the outside to separate as the tissues underneath dry and die, and so they will leave cracks on the surface. And there will usually be an increase in woodpecker activity on the ash trees as well as they're trying to feed on the larvae that are hiding underneath the bark. So this picture here, you actually see a lot of the bark has actually been scraped off from the tree, and that's just from woodpeckers as they're landing on the tree and their feet are scraping off the bark. And just important to be able to distinguish between the D-shaped exit holes of the emerald ash borer and a hole produced by a feeding woodpecker there. So you can see the two images side by side, or the two feeding holes in the woodpecker and the EAB exit hole side by side there. So this map, just to show you the distribution of emerald ash borer across North America at the moment, that's overlaid on top of the range of the three most commonly found ash species, that being black ash, white ash, and green ash, and then the emerald ash borer distribution there and highlighted in yellow. So it is quite widespread. Yeah, so just ranging across North America. So the impacts from the emerald ash borer, the ecological impact, so I had mentioned earlier, so it has killed many native ash trees, but it does change the overall makeup and structure of the forest. You can see in that image on the top right-hand corner there, those dead trees all within that forest there. So typically where you have those ash trees that are dominating the canopy of the forest, once you have all of those dead ash trees, that allows for more light penetration to come down into the forest as well, and just change the overall makeup and function of the forest as well. And then as well, there are many living organisms that rely on ash trees in order for their survival. So the loss of the trees will impact all those other organisms as well. From an economic standpoint, I had mentioned as well the high cost of tree removal and replacement in cities. So oftentimes, in many cities where ash trees once lined city streets, those had to be removed and disposed of and then replaced, which costs municipalities a lot of money and time and resources, as well as commercial losses as well. As with other tree species, ash trees are used in our forestry sector as lumber, for pulp, and for furniture, and other uses. And from a social perspective as well, I like to highlight that image on the left-hand side of the screen. So those are ash trees within an urban setting, within a park. So the loss of those trees in urban spaces. There's also the impact to the overall aesthetics and visual beauty. Here, I'm currently located here in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, one of our local parks, there were a lot of ash trees that unfortunately had to be removed, and that also poses an issue as well within urban spaces. You don't want a bunch of large dead trees in areas where people are going to be walking through and activities are going to be carried out, because that poses as a potential hazard, right? So definitely something that needs to be addressed. So the different management strategies that currently exist for the emerald ash borer, the main ones being the chemical, biological, and mechanical. So most of the trees earlier on were removed via mechanical removal, but this is one that is costly. It requires a lot of time and resources and coordination, as well as the proper disposal of the trees. So the chemical option is a good option for larger individual trees within urban settings where it is very costly to do the mechanical removal of the trees. So chemical option is still it's a very viable option that is still used, done via injection into the tree using insecticides. And there are different insecticides that are used depending on the life cycle of the emerald ash borer. But one of the ones I really wanted to highlight here today is the biological management of the emerald ash borer. So one of the characteristics that was mentioned earlier on about invasive species is in the new environments that they are introduced to, is the invasive species often lack natural predators, right? And so that's one of the ways that they're able to spread so quickly and rapidly, is because there's nothing that is keeping their populations in check or preventing them from spreading. So the biological control utilizes predators that were found in the emerald ash borer's natural range, and they target different life stages of the emerald ash borer. So there are 4 different species of parasitoid wasps. These wasps do not target humans, and they require the emerald ash borer, just as the emerald ash borer requires ash trees to complete their life cycle. They require the emerald ash borer to complete their life cycle. So laying the eggs into them. Once the eggs hatch, they will feed on the emerald ash borer at their different life stages, and then they will emerge from there. But yeah, so just one of the really interesting ways that we're also able to use different elements of the environment to help with an environmental issue, right? So awesome. Now moving on to black ash, I'm just going to give an introduction to the tree itself. So black ash is a relatively long-lived and slow-growing hardwood tree species. It can typically live up to, the larger trees can live up to 200 to 300 years. So it's globally found only in North America. Approximately 51%, so just more than half of its global range occurs within Canada, with about a quarter of the total species range within the province of Ontario. So why I'm focusing specifically on the province of Ontario, just because I'll get into a little bit later, but because the project that we're currently coordinating here at the Invasive Species Centre focuses on black ash specifically within Ontario, and the fact that black ash is a species at risk within Ontario. So it is the ash species that is found further north than any other of the ash species. And is considered a foundational or a keystone wetland tree species in the habitats that it is found. So typically within swamp forests and riparian ecosystems. So it's really important for a number of reasons, but it plays an important role in regulating the hydrology in the areas that it is found. So just like the movement and flow of the control of water, for carbon sequestration and other environmental functions, but it also is a tree that helps provide habitat for other organisms that live within wetland environments. And so the loss of this tree would obviously negatively impact the different wetland and riparian ecosystems and the overall health and function of those environments that it is found in. So the uses of black ash, so like other ash species as well, but black ash has some unique characteristics just based off of the wood that it produces. So because it grows in those, it tolerates areas that are, the soils are usually more wet. or seasonally flooded. The wood itself is quite ring porous, so it's a flexible wood, but it's also very strong. And it makes it valuable for use for certain things such as tool handles, for furniture, cabinets, and flooring. Fun fact, it can also be used for the construction of electric guitar bodies. So it is a unique wood just based off of the unique characteristics of where it is found. So it is sought after, and it does have commercial value to it as well. But one thing that I want to highlight about black ash, this is something that I was not aware of until I actually started coordinating this project here, but there is a strong cultural importance of black ash to the indigenous people across North America where black ash is found. So it's a species of tree that the wood was used to make woven baskets, for snowshoe frames, for canoe ribs, for bows, lacrosse sticks, and other items, and also used as a fuel wood. But it's an important part of their history, the culture, economies of many indigenous people. And so the decline in black ash populations, it impacts that knowledge and skill transfer for future generations. So the loss of the species would be the loss of this important cultural practice. And this for myself really hit close to home as well, just having a strong connection to a cultural practice in my family and where my parents and where my family are from, we have certain traditional practices that we engage in yearly, and just the thought of that being taken away from us. So my parents emigrated from Italy, just for example, and it's that connection that we have to the land that we're from, something that we've brought with us, but we carry on here with us today, that keeps us tied to our homeland and to our ancestors, and it's a really important part of my own personal identity. And who I am as a person. So I can't imagine the loss of something like that that's so important to us, right? And the loss of that connection to who we are. So something I just really wanted to drive home. Yes, of course, when we're talking about the loss of a species, we're talking about the loss of the importance and the functions that it has within the environments that it's found in, but also not to forget that there is that strong connection to people, right? We are just as much a part of the environment as any other living thing. So just that just the importance of the loss of something within the environment and the loss that it has to people that are very much connected to the land. So I'm just quickly going to go over some key characteristics of black ash. So just to distinguish it from other ash species, like other ash species, it's a compound leaf. So the single leaf is made up of a bunch of smaller leaflets that make up the entire leaf. But the thing I want to highlight here is that those leaflets, to really distinguish it from other ash species, they're attached directly to the central stem of the leaf, as opposed to other ash species where there is a smaller stem that connects the leaflets to the central stem. So seeing those leaflets connected directly to the stem is that main characteristic that I want to focus on. The bark is usually thin and scaly, as opposed to other ash species where the bark is tighter to the trunk. When you're looking at the twigs, black ash has a gap between the terminal twig at the very tip of the twig and the first pair of lateral buds, where other ash species, the lateral buds will be tight against that terminal bud at the end of the twig. The seeds themselves, so the seeds are winged samaras, just like, I think, like maple trees. So black ash leaves, that wing portion extends from the tip all the way down to the base, whereas other ash species like green ash, that wing is much more prominent on the top part of the seed structure. But then where the actual seed is housed, there's not much of that wing structure there. And like all other ash species, it grows in an opposite branching pattern, but that's not unique to ash. That's something that should be used in combination with the other ID features. So just very quickly, the range and distribution of black ash across the province and country and the continent. So black ash in Canada ranges from Western Newfoundland to southeastern Manitoba. So just to give an idea of where that occurs on the landscape. So very quickly here, just the connection between invasive species and species at risk. So the United Nations has ranked invasive species as a top 5 driver of global species decline. They infect, wound, parasitize, and directly kill species at risk. But really the main thing that we're talking about here with the impact of invasive species and species at risk is that reduction in biodiversity, right? By outcompeting desirable native species. So I have a quote there by Paul Stamets. Maybe some of you have heard of him, but I've often heard him quoting here that biodiversity is biosecurity, right? So it's the species diversity that really plays that vital role in supporting the ecosystem function and enhancing resiliency to other disturbances, right? So just something to be mindful of and aware of. So black ash is a species at risk. So of the ash species, black ash is the most susceptible, and it is the species that is most affected by the emerald ash borer, and it's responsible. So it's the primary driver of the species decline. There are other species that rely on black ash for their survival, notably the Canadian sphinx moth, which relies on the foliage of black ash for its larval development. So, it's the loss of a species, but yes, there's the interconnectedness of other organisms that rely on each other, and so this would impact other species as well, right? So really why black ash, just very quickly to summarize here, it's why it is listed as a species at risk in Ontario. Right now, it is still quite widespread across the province, but it was previously believed that the northernmost extent of the black ash range was protected by the climate. So there was a limitation. It was believed that the emerald ash borer couldn't expand and invade areas farther north where the northernmost range of black ash is. But more recent research has emerged that showed that the emerald ash borer is actually capable of surviving extreme cold events as low as -50 degrees. And so this climate limitation is no longer something that we think is going to prevent the spread or the further expansion of the emerald ash borer north. And so this puts the northernmost region of black ash at risk now of infestation. That coupled with global a warming climate. So this is no longer a limitation, but something to be aware of. So it's predicted that within the next 100 years, upwards of 70% or more of the species can be or can decline as much as 70%. Yeah, so that's all I'm going to talk about for that slide, just for the sake of time. So just very important, or just very quick, the importance of seed collection for conservation. So this is a really important way of actually being able to conserve species. So we're able to take something from the species itself that's at risk. So in this case, it's the seeds, and store them off-site. So we have some genetic piece of the species that we're trying to protect, but away from the potential risks. And so in Canada, we have the National Tree Seed Centre. It's the only national seed bank that preserves forest genetics across the country. So the idea is for black ash in particular to collect seeds from areas that it hasn't yet been collected from. And from as many different eco-districts as possible to preserve the full range of species and the genetic diversity of the species. The challenge here is that black ash produces low quantities of seed most years. It has a cycle of seed production that is a bit different from the other ash species, but their large seed crop typically doesn't occur for at least 8 years. That seems to be the interval there. So that coupled with the fact that emerald ash borer is capable to actually kill young and regenerating ash species before they are able to produce seed, it just presents some challenges for us in terms of conservation. So just real quick, our initiative here at the Invasive Species Centre. So this is completed with funding and support from the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks through their Species at Risk Stewardship Program. Really, this project is focusing on raising awareness of the emerald ash borer, just kind of bringing it more to the forefront again. It's still something that's very much present, still a major issue here in the province of Ontario and where emerald ash borer is still found across the landscape. But really, making that connection to the species at risk, black ash. And our main objective for this initiative over the coming years, alongside raising awareness, creating some educational tools, is coordinating a network of volunteers from across the province of Ontario. So this project, again, it's just within the province of Ontario itself. but going out and inspiring volunteers to go out and collect black ash seed that will be sent to us for further processing. And then we will then take those seeds and send them out to the National Tree Seed Center in order for there to be some genetic research done, but also for long-term preservation. Yeah, so hopefully to preserve this species before its populations decline further. And so the actual volunteer network is called the Black Ash Community Action Network. So something that we're really excited about. And just really quickly, so we're really wanting to focus on this trees that have survived invasion of emerald ash borer, known as lingering ash. So really trying to focus on areas where the emerald ash borer has invaded and has caused a widespread mortality, but trying to find those trees that have survived and collect those seeds, just because they could hold some type of genetic keys, some type of resistance. It's just that can help with the long-term survival of this species. And ideally trying to collect black ash from as many different eco districts as possible. Black ash trees that have grown in all these different eco districts that have adapted over time to all the different conditions. So we just want to be able to capture that wide range of genetic diversity that has adapted to each of those unique characteristics, and that'll kind of give us the best chance moving forward. So just some of the things that we've completed over the years. It's a 3-year project. We're currently in year 2. And this in the coming years are really where we're wanting to capitalize on seed collection efforts. So just some of the stuff that we've done, and a little bit more information there as well. Just going to fly through for the sake of time because I think I'm over here, but just some new resources that we've created. So a new emerald ash borer fact sheet and seed collection protocol that will be available for volunteers. We've also launched an iNaturalist project for mapping the distribution of black ash across the landscape. So there's a QR code there. If anyone's sitting in the audience can really quickly take out their phone and snap a picture of that, it'll bring you to the iNaturalist project. But we're asking people to go out and help us document locations of black ash across the landscape. And just importantly as well, because of that strong cultural component with Indigenous communities, we're hoping to work alongside Indigenous communities and listen and learn from them to see how they've been affected by the loss of black ash within their communities, and to see if there's any ways that we can complement existing efforts to our project and incorporate that, incorporating their stories and knowledge and trying to help us move the project forward. So what's next? We've launched our webpage, our official project webpage. There's another QR code there if you'd like to scan that as well. And that includes our volunteer registration form that has to be completed for anyone who wants to help out. Again, this is just restricted to Ontario, so we're only able to collect from within the province. Yeah. And so how you can help. So register to volunteer. For those of you that use iNaturalist, we highly encourage you to go onto that program and collect observations of black ash and help us with that. And then anyone who's interested in collecting black ash seed that is located in Ontario, please, we highly encourage you to join the project there and register through our website. And just looking to the future. So this is a long-term vision, right? Today we see the effects. We see that the species is in decline, but if we come together and we kind of pool our resources and efforts and knowledge, we can get ahead of this. And hopefully within the future, this is a species that will continue to thrive and exist across the landscape. So yeah, kind of our call to action there. We need your help, and hopefully I've inspired some of you guys to get involved, but that's the presentation there. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Vincent, for the information case study on the emerald ash borer and the efforts underway to preserve black ash, a species at risk. To wrap up this morning's first session, let's welcome David Dakevich with a talk titled Invasive Species and Forest Disturbances. David is an entomology technician for the Invasive Species Centre, where he has collaborated on national and international research projects to identify and monitor for invasive and native insect species that impact forest habitats. He works primarily with the Great Lakes Forestry Center's Insect Museum and Diagnostics Laboratory in Sault Ste. Marie, which houses over 160,000 forest insect specimens. David has over 10 years' experience identifying insects throughout Canada and holds a Master's of Environmental Science from the University of Guelph. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Like Sharon has said, my name is David Dukevich. I am the entomology technician at the Invasive Species Centre, and I primarily work with identifying not just invasive species, but all different types of forest insects throughout Ontario. So to dive right in here, I want to talk about threats of invasive species on Ontario forests. Today, there's 70 million hectares of forest in Ontario, which is just over about 20% of Canada's forests, and it's about 2% of the world's forests. So there's a lot of area that we're dealing with to try and protect. Ontario has the third largest forest workforce in Canada, and is mostly due to self-employed people, but the workforce tends to be older, and a lot of those people are doing this for their livelihood. Biomass is also a growing part of the industry, as well as we also lose a huge number of cubic meters and to insect loss. So in 2024, almost 700,000 cubic yards or cubic meters of wood was essentially lost due to insect and disease loss throughout Ontario. So all in all, it's no surprise to anyone here that it is a critical resource in order to manage sustainably. So right off the bat, Ontario has more invasive species than any other province in Canada. This is primarily due to a variety of reasons, which includes, different trade partners, tourism, international travel, as well as basic geography. So Ontario has 3 different types of forests, and we have a wide variety of forests being, so close to the US border, but also being part of the most southern part of Canada. Essentially, we have a vast topography, like I had mentioned, and there's always new threats on the horizon as we are so close to a lot of these states which have many different invasive species that are already affecting them. So protecting Ontario's forests from invasion is definitely very important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of these different types of threats. Mostly going to touch on oak wilt and Asian longhorn beetle, which are 2 species that are on our radar. They aren't established in Canada, but there are 2 on the landscape that are essentially around. But there are many different types of hosts that we can be concerned about because we have many different varieties of trees in Ontario that are associated with different pests and pathogens. So for example, oak wilt, tends to go after oaks, but Asian longhorn beetle, there's maples, poplars that are involved, emerald ash borer you just heard, all different types of ash. Hemlock woolly adelgids is your hemlock trees. Beech bark and beech leaf disease are affecting the beech trees, and white pine blister rust goes after the white pines, and spongy moth goes after 250 different varieties of species. So there's quite a number of trees and different plants that can be affected by many of these potential invasive species pests. So like I had mentioned, oak wilt is concerning to coming into Ontario. Ontario has the highest oak-related GDP of any other province studied. Oak is a hard, dense wood, and it's very difficult to chip and grind, so it becomes very expensive. So with the oak wilt detections in Ontario in 2023, rather than using the chip and grind method for dealing with the oak wilt, the deep burial method was used as it was the most cost-effective way to bury the oak wilt that was affecting the Niagara region, as well as the Springwater Township area. In terms of Asian longhorn beetle, maple was found to be the main host in Canada, even though in Asia, poplar is another host that it tends to go after. But in Canada, it's affecting mostly our maples. And in 2022, when the Asian longhorn beetle was sort of found, and the multi-governmental level of eradication project went on, it was maple was one of the few species that, or one of the species that were taken out, and they were all chipped in order to get rid of that type of infestation, in order to get rid of the Asian longhorn beetle. And we don't want the Asian longhorn beetle essentially moving into our forest, because we have a large portion of our forest is maple trees. Like I had said before, I had mentioned the deep burial method for oak wilt, how it was treated, and there is the burn and chip method, but the cut down and deep burial method was the one that was used for the emergency treatment. And then in Toronto, for dealing with Asian longhorn beetle, 29,000 trees and nearly 60,000 stems were removed from that area in order to get rid of those two species. And people like you are the primary, are the first people on the ground in order to see these health issues. So you can play a major role in the early detection and the rapid response by knowing the signs and symptoms of these key pests. Here you can see just sort of a brief understanding of what the trees were taken out, what the percentages were, and what the outbreak levels were. So in both cases, if there was a slower detection time, it's not good. So the more trees are impacted, the more trees needed to remove, so the higher cost it would be. So by working on the early response time and the rapid identification of these different species, it prevents higher and higher costs for removing invasive species in these areas, in forests in general as well. I know that throughout the States, Asian longhorn beetle is a big impact for a lot of municipalities, as well as forest areas, and a lot of the removal cost has to do with just removing large stands of infested areas. So just some pathways and how do these different species spread. These are all ways within the industry where invasive species and pathways can spread. So we have nursery stock, imports, general harvest, equipment, firewood movement, road construction. All of these ways are different pathways for these invasive species that can spread. So being aware of potential pathways for invasive species is very good in order to know within the industry of where the potential areas of impact can be. So depending on these species, or depending on if the species is already present or not, would depend on whether your actions look different and how you would manage those different invasive species. So for these species present, we want to contain and prevent the spread into natural contiguous forests. We want to arrange pathways like roadways to make sure that we're not spreading into new areas. So, if we go from one harvested area to another, we don't want to move those potential invasive species. We want to keep our equipment clean when we're going from one place to another. And this also includes not just the forest industry, but, for landowners who say are moving from either one farm to another. Oh, my light's turned off. One farm to another, or for example, if you have a home in the city and moving your equipment to, say, a cottage or another building or another area, it's always good to work on clean equipment protocols in order to make sure that those invasive species don't move into our contiguous forests, our forest habitats. So like I had mentioned before, and also preventing recreational movement of firewood to hunting camps or cottages, and being aware of potential pathways between, hiking with pets, washing your boots from moving one place to another, and really stopping the movement of different types of material from one place to another. So for new species like oak wilt and ALB, Asian longhorn beetle, primary means of spread is important and also can be due to firewood. So education, outreach, and training can aid in the prevention of this type of movement. So like I had mentioned about forest pathways, so when it comes to individuals and also when it comes to industry, it is important to know what's out there. So this data is from 2009, so it's a little bit outdated, but Minnesota, Michigan, and New York all have priority forest invasives that we want to prevent, similar to oak wilt, as well as Asian longhorn beetle for some of them. And so we want to make sure that we're following all of our phytosanitary requirements for the Canadian-US borders to prevent them from coming into Canada. As well as domestic imports. So Ontario and Manitoba share a very strong partnership with resource sharing, and we want to make sure that we follow the phytosanitary requirements in order to make sure that we don't pass different invasive species from one location to another. And a big portion of that is for people in order to know different invasive species, what they have, what they're moving, and to make sure that they're not at risk of moving those invasive species from one forested area to another. Excuse me. So let's actually take a quick look at what type of domestic movements we have throughout Ontario. So like I said before, the managed forest is 74% is crown land, so mostly in Northern Ontario. 13% is protected land, as well as 14% is private land, so private homeowners. So we're looking at about 80% is is essentially our productive forest in Ontario. We have 3 forest regions that are further divided into forest management units, and these they're managed by sustainable forest license holders. So these license holders just essentially look after the different forest types, and you can see in here, each one of these is part of a manage holder area. And this comes with its own requirements and responsibilities to the managed forest unit in accordance with the provincial standards. So how they actually go about using these or managing these forests and preventing invasive species movement. In the southern region, there's more a smaller movement of wood products, but there's a more diverse number of species. There's more variety of species which is harvested, and tree diversity decreases moving north to south. So it is a higher risk of things from the northern part of the province moving to the southern part of the province, but there's a higher risk when you're moving the other way. So it's always good to make sure that you know what types of forest products you're actually using and how it can be moved throughout the province. So like so this is just sort of a map of the southern area, or not a map, sorry, a graph of the southern area and how different forested areas are harvested. So there's a lot of red pine and white pine plantations in southern Ontario, many mixedwood stands as well. So a lot of forest stands are sort of sparsed in between different agricultural zones, but the forest region in southern Ontario is pretty diverse in its all types of woods and hardwoods, as well as mixed species. So what are some solutions that we can look at in order to prevent the spreads of invasive species? So how we manage these forest pests depend on sort of this kind of Madison had discussed a little bit about the invasive species curve. So this is sort of like a timeline scale of essentially that invasive species curve. And how it's laid out here. So prevention is one of the biggest things. Here's some examples of some of the insects that might be associated with every stage of these different types of curves. So Asian longhorn beetle and spotted lanternfly, oak wilt, prevention of entry into Canada, prevention of entry into Ontario, and the early detection and the rapid removal of those species is very important for the eradication of those groups. Hemlock woolly adelgid, where it's now sort of established a small area, the containment of those areas, so the slow the spread program, where we want to slow the spread of the of this hemlock woolly adelgid into different forest units. And then if we move on to some other species like spongy moth or emerald ash borer, for example, we tend to use biological controls. We're into the long-term management side of things, and trying to essentially stop them from having major outbreaks in those areas. My talk this afternoon will dive in a little bit more on these types of invasive species as well. So, how are humans connected with these areas? So we have people that work in mills that can detect certain invasive species if they see things that are coming in. Forest operators are definitely important members, arborists, would be included in these groups so they can detect these types of invasive species and outbreaks that might be issues. Forest managers, you know, what they're finding on the landscape is also important, and as well as nurseries and tree planters. Like I said, arborists and foresters are definitely people that are occupations that might come in contact with any of these invasive species. So there's legislation available and guidelines. I had mentioned the clean equipment protocol for moving forest products or not forest products, forest machinery and different types of even invasive species management machinery from one place to another. There's an Invasive Species Act, which was put in place in 2015, that basically outlines any type of invasive species that are in Ontario and their movement through Ontario or coming into Ontario, and what guidelines are associated with those to help prevent invasive species. And there's also different metrics that are put out there, like the oak wilt risk meter. So it says the greatest here, it says the greatest risk for oak wilt transmission is in April to July. Well, why is that? Well, mostly that's because of the oak wilt fungus is sort of breaking through the oak trees at that area. That's the time when the nididulid beetle is flying around and is attracted to those funguses. Those are the highest risk areas that oak wilt can be transmitted as it sort of lessens and lessens during those times throughout the year. So the reason why we put out these don't prune oak trees between essentially April to November is because we have the greatest risk is right after the snow melts is when oak wilt can be transmitted, and then during the winter months when the beetles aren't around and the fungus is no longer there, it is more of a safer period in order to basically cut down those trees. And this is sort of a prevention protocol in order to make sure that oak wilt is not spread. Invasive species work done by these are the types of work that invasive species removal can happen for different areas and information that can be used. So removal of infested material, limbing removal of healthy trees to make sure that they're no longer around, clean equipment protocol, and removal of invasive species, invasive species training, similar to what you're finding out today with all this information on invasive species. Adjust tree marking to maintain forest resilience after emerald ash borer comes in, because there's potential for invasive species to move in once emerald ash borer has taken out the portions of the canopy. Creation of invasive species identification material, which is things that you can find, and sort of the list goes on. There's a lot of things that you can go. Working with third parties, certifications in order to look at invasive species management options, as well as there's also different types of training courses that are available. There's this oak wilt arborist training was done I think last year, and there's a number of different arborists that went out and looked at on the ground ways to identify oak wilt, and there's different guidelines in order to follow, as well as additional resources like our website, the Invasive Species Centre.ca, different webinars, but there's lots of resources out there for invasive species management, as well as invasive species resources that can be used in different forest disturbance areas. So With that note, I wanted to thank everyone, and if there's any questions, feel free to ask them. And yeah, or are we going to lunch right now?
Thank you, David, for connecting the dots between invasive species and large-scale forest health impacts. That brings us to the end of our first session. We'll now take a break for lunch, and let's aim to return at 12:15 p.m. for the next session on success in management. And like David mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the Q&A pod, and our speakers will type their answers for you. All right, we'll see you soon and enjoy the break. It is now 12:15 p.m. Eastern Time, and welcome back, everyone. We're ready to begin our second session of the day, Success in Management. We'll start with Madison, who will speak on early detection and rapid response, the role of community scientists. Maddie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sharon. Hope everybody had a good lunch and is ready to get back into invasive species. So let me just move my screens around here. Okay. So I'm going to be talking all about the importance of community science for the next 15-ish minutes. So what is community science? It's the collection and analysis of data relating to the natural world by members of the public done in collaboration with people in the scientific community. So invasive species are a pretty big problem. They're actually one of the 5 major drivers of biodiversity loss. Thankfully, it's not all bad because there are a few ways that we can get involved and help make a difference. A really important component of invasive species prevention and action is community science. Community science basically helps increase collaboration by connecting members of the public with professionals like researchers or government officials. It allows you to provide data or information to people who can actually make decisions on invasive species policies, or to people that can, who are actually managing invasive species on the ground. So I really want to dive into just a few of the different ways that you can get actively involved as a community scientist. Absolutely anyone can be a community scientist. You don't need to have any sort of prior knowledge or training or courses or anything like that. All you really need is a love of nature. So one of the best ways you can actively get involved in invasive species prevention is to learn how to identify invasive species and how to report them. Reporting invasive species is really important. Community scientists are often the first ones to discover new invasives and to make that first report. One example is of emerald ash borer in British Columbia, actually. So somebody was just sitting outside, enjoying their day, and literally felt the bug fall onto their head. This person thought it was a cool insect, so they looked it up, realized it was a highly invasive species, and made a report. Government inspectors responded to that report. They realized, the severity of this. They went out to the area, found an infestation that they might not have found otherwise without that first report. So that one person that made that report, helped bring attention to that infestation that may have taken more years for it to, for people to interact with and view. So more people that know about invasive species means we have more people out paying attention and looking for them. This increased monitoring can really lead to the early detection of new invasives, which can initiate rapid responses. And we've seen this happen a few times. For example, with oak wilt. I know David touched on oak wilt a little bit earlier. It's a tree disease that's caused by invasive fungus, and it was found for the first time in Canada in 2023. We've been working really hard to, spread the word about this disease so that people know what to look for. And thankfully, the first person, that arborist that found the disease on that tree, knew what it was, knew it was invasive, and made that report. And because of that report, we were able to respond really quickly, manage that site, and remove oak wilt from the landscape. So right now, it's a good news story with oak wilt because of that, increased public outreach, communication, and that role of community science. This graph really just emphasizes the importance of early detection. So this invasion curve shows that prevention is the most cost-effective solution when managing for invasive species. We can see that when a species first arrives, it can be relatively easy to control if you catch it early. But if a species goes unnoticed or unmanaged, then population sizes can grow and grow and grow. Eventually, they spread so much that you can no longer contain them, and the only solution becomes long-term control, and that can be quite costly. There are a few different ways that you can report invasive species. The first is EDMAPS, which I'll actually talk about more in depth in the next slide. There's also iNaturalist, which some of you may be already familiar with. It's a really great platform for reporting all sorts of natural observations, whether they're invasive or native. If you prefer to talk to somebody, on the phone personally, you can give the Invading Species Hotline a call with the number there. And you can also contact the Canadian Food Inspection Agency when you're reporting regulated species here in Canada. They're the ones that oversee species that could impact, human health or well-being. So a lot of the plant pests that could impact food, for example, are kind of overseen by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the CFIA. So they're a really great one to report things like oak wilt or hemlock woolly adelgid too. So if we want to catch invasives early and prevent their spread, we need to report what we see. So EDMAPS is a really great tool for reporting and tracking invasive species. It stands for the Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System. This platform shows the real-time tracking of invasive species and pest occurrences. So what'll happen is a member of the public, like yourself, will see something that you maybe think is invasive. You'll take a picture, send in a report, and then that report gets verified by experts. Once it's verified, it will then get posted publicly for everybody to see. So you can report invasives through EDMAPS on your computer or through an app on your phone. So this platform is really easy to use. So let's just say you're out and about on a walk, enjoying the nice weather. You happen to look up and see a beech tree and you notice some beech leaf disease. Hypothetically, maybe you've learned about this disease through our website, so you know it's invasive and that you should make a report. So let's go over how you would actually do that. If you see something suspicious, you'll pull out EDMAPS on your computer or even better on your phone. There's a few different things you can look through in EDMAPS that you'll see along the top there. But when you have an invasive species observation, you'll go to report sightings. It'll then ask you the type of invasive you're reporting. So you can report any type of invasive species. Beech leaf disease is specifically caused by an invasive nematode. So in this example, we would hit the fungi and diseases little category. Then it'll just ask you to fill in some information like the species name, the location of the finding, and some pictures. The more info you provide and the more pictures you take, the better. It'll just help those verifiers really confirm whether or not what you're reporting is actually what you're reporting. So when you're done filling all this in, you'll submit it. That report then gets sent to an expert. So they'll review all that information and confirm whether or not it's invasive. And then once it's been positively confirmed, it'll be uploaded onto the site for everybody to see. The timelines can really vary depending on how much of a priority the species is. For example, I actually submitted a report to EDMAPS about oak wilt a few years ago. I thought it might be oak wilt. Thankfully, it wasn't, but I got responses back within like 2 hours because it's a high priority pest. So the response times can be quite great. So once that report goes public, it'll show up on a distribution map like this one here. It's a really cool way to visually see where different reports are, kind of like what people have been seeing around them. So you make this report, you see this map, but what good does it really do? Thankfully, there's a lot of different ways that this information can be used. So professionals can help use it to select sites for management. It can help identify areas where we need to focus more training and outreach. It can help researchers select sites for research or identify changes in distribution. It can really be helpful to help us understand more about a specific pest. These distribution maps too give us a really good idea of where a species might be, but it definitely isn't an exhaustive list of everywhere a particular species is found. It's all based on public reports, so the more reports we have, the more accurate this map kind of becomes. There are so many examples of when reporting made a positive impact, but one of the biggest examples here in Ontario would be Asian longhorn beetle, and I'll actually get into that in the next presentation. But another example we can quickly talk about is spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive insect that's currently not found here in Ontario or in Canada. This insect really likes to feed on fruits and grapes, and it can really impact the agricultural sector. It is also a forest pest, but probably more so agricultural. So there are a lot of areas in Ontario and Canada that would be at risk if this pest were to come here. So someone posted a picture online with the caption, "Weird beetle found in Mississauga." People saw this picture and immediately recognized the insect as the invasive spotted lanternfly. There was a ton of activity online where people were sharing the post to the point where government officials saw and started making plans to act. Thankfully, it came out later that this was just a misunderstanding and the photo wasn't actually taken here in Ontario, but it kind of shows the power of social media and the power of reporting. This one photo online was about to trigger some serious collaborative action. So as a community scientist, you can learn how to identify and report invasives. Another thing you can do is try to help prevent the spread. So our prevention strategies can be quite specific to a species, but we do have a few general tips that work really well to prevent the spread of invasives. So the first is to brush off your boots or shoes after walking in an area with invasive species. So when you're done hiking or walking through a park, just give your shoes a little cleaning. A lot of invasive seeds or insects can be on the ground and get caught up in the mud. I talked about that earlier this morning. If you bring a pet with you when you're walking on trails, give them a little brushing as well. They can also pick up invasives. The second biggest tip here is to not move firewood. Again, I talked about this earlier, but there can be a ton of different insects or fungi that live underneath the bark, so you really don't know what's hiding out there. You could be accidentally transporting it if you transport that firewood. So don't, cut down a tree at home, take that firewood and bring it to your cottage with you. You could be transporting things long distances like that. The third tip I have here is to not dump any yard clippings. Sometimes people are super well-intentioned and decide to, throw grass clippings or old plants into the fields or parks, thinking it'll just, degrade and go back into the earth. But sometimes that yard waste can have invasive plants or seeds or other things in there that can cause new infestation. So just keep that in mind. Another way you can become a community scientist is to monitor for invasives. So if you're out walking around your neighborhood, just take a look every once in a while and monitor the health of the trees around you. Look for things out of the ordinary, like rapid tree decline, clusters of egg masses, things like that. You can also pay attention to the healthy trees. They're just as important as knowing which ones are declining. It can really help you figure out where different species are spreading. We actually have a few programs at the Invasive Species Centre dedicated solely to monitoring invasive species and kind of figuring out where they are in the landscape, how they're spreading, that sort of thing. These programs are our monitoring networks, which are really just made up of volunteer community scientists that want to look for and report invasive species. So the first one here is our Hemlock Woolly Adelgid Monitoring Network, which is developed and delivered in partnership with Natural Resources Canada and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. This network is more for municipalities and property owners, but I wanted to show you this as a positive example of what can happen when we, monitor forest health and get involved. So just really quickly before I get into the actual program, Hemlock Woolly Adelgid is a really tiny little sap-sucking insect that infests and kill hemlock trees. They're really tiny. They're really hard to see without some sort of magnification for the insects themselves. But what you're likely to see are the white ovisacs where they keep their eggs. So these little white clumps, it kind of looks like little cotton balls or maybe little clumps of snow. But you're likely to find these ovisacs on the underside of branches at the base of the needles. You can really see the difference here in these pictures between an early and late infestation. So in the top picture, it's really hard to see when these insects are, fresh on a new tree in small numbers. Those egg masses can be really difficult to detect. But when their population numbers grow, you can really see that infestation on the branch. And you can see it much more clearly here on this heavily infested twig. So because of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid has been spreading more and more kind of each year, so we worked with the CFA and NRCan to develop this monitoring network. And this program involves the use of a newer kind of interception trap that was developed by Dr. Sherilyn Partridge and Meg Sanders out of Grand Valley State University. So this whole monitoring network really revolves around the orange interception traps that you see in this picture here. So these traps have 4 slots for microscope slides, and those slides are dipped in petroleum jelly. And the whole idea is that you'll just put this trap up in the environment in like a hemlock stand. You'll leave it for 2 months. And as like the wind picks up little insect fragments, like maybe a little insect itself, maybe a part of an insect, maybe some of that wool that they make, it can get caught in the wind or fall directly on the trap and then get stuck in that jelly. And we can then take those slides, look at them under a microscope to really see if Hemlock Woolly Adelgid is there. we can then give the slides over to our partners and they can do some lab analysis to confirm through genetic testing. So this is a really great program that we've been using for the past few years, and it really gives you know, a unique opportunity for community members to become actively involved in monitoring and stewardship of their woodlots. It's a really passive program. You just toss this trap up, leave it for 2 months, and then come back. There are a couple outcomes of this program and of setting up those traps. So year one, a few years ago, we deployed 50 traps. By looking at the slides visually, we found 2 that might have hemlock woolly adelgid, and then we sent them to the lab for confirmation, and we found 1 positive detection of hemlock woolly adelgid. So on that red star here on the map, that's where we were able to find hemlock woolly adelgid through this new program, through volunteer support. It's a detection that may have otherwise gone unnoticed for quite some time. So it now helps those people start to manage the problem sooner and figure out some sort of response plans. We've been continuing this monitoring network in the years following that first one. We have about 100 traps total throughout Ontario now. We have also expanded the program into all of the provinces that have eastern hemlock. So PEI, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Quebec all have these traps out to try and monitor for hemlock woolly adelgid. And we do try to, you know, with each year, increase the amount of traps or increase the amount of collaboration. So this program really just helps show that the importance of collaboration, the importance of community scientists, how you can help. You can, you know, volunteer, set up a trap, and by doing that, help us figure out where hemlock woolly adelgid has been spreading. This is another monitoring network, but this one is focused entirely on beech leaf disease. The goal of this network is to help learn more about where beech leaf disease is found on the landscape. So just in case you're not familiar with beech leaf disease, it's a disease that's thought to be caused by an invasive nematode, and this nematode feeds on the beech leaves and causes damage in the buds. It can really damage all species of beech trees. So American, European, Chinese, and Oriental beech are all susceptible to the disease over here in North America. It can seriously weaken the trees and in some cases even kill the beech. So this is what the nematode looks like. Super small, hard to see without some sort of magnification. Kind of looks like a little worm. This map is really showing the distribution of beech leaf disease over time, just based on the current surveys that we have. So it was initially detected in Ohio in 2012, which we can see in the light yellow color. And then since then it's spread quite a bit and it can now be found in 15 states. It was also found in Ontario for the first time in 2017 in the Elgin and Norfolk counties, which is the areas kind of in those blue colors. And then it has been spreading kind of since it's been found in Ontario. So the leading edge right now is kind of the Peterborough, Brighton area. Because it's been spreading so much, because it's relatively new, we don't know a ton about it. We still have a lot of research that's needed to really figure out, you know, proper prevention recommendations, proper management recommendations. So to help researchers and us better understand the disease, we're asking community scientists like yourself to report any beech leaf disease that you see. We've actually turned it into a contest just to make it a little more interesting too. So all you have to do, you can scan the QR code here, or you can just check out iNaturalist. All of this is through iNaturalist. You'll just go join the project, report any beech leaf disease that you find. And by making that report, you're automatically entered for a chance to win a fun community science monitoring prize pack. So this contest is open until the end of July. So try and get out there, see if you can find any beech leaf disease and make some reports, because those reports can go directly to the experts, directly to the researchers who can help, you know, help us understand this disease better and give us some better recommendations. So there's a lot of different ways you can become a community scientist, like I've been talking about. The last one I'll touch on right now is participating in local events. So we've hosted a ton of different plant polls to help manage invasive plants. So we've put a call out for volunteers in the past, wherein we'll all meet at a site that's heavily infested and we'll start pulling out invasive plants. So this one here is garlic mustard, and it gets its name because of the smell. So if you rip off and crush a leaf with your fingers, you should smell kind of like a garlic aroma. They're really easy to pull, so this is a great one to, you know, pull in a group, gather in a group, and try to manage a site, especially if they're in smaller clusters. They're really easy to pull out. We've had similar events for Himalayan balsam, which is another invasive plant that was initially introduced in North America because people thought it would be pretty in their gardens, but it really did escape cultivation, escaped these gardens, and now it spreads more easily into other areas. These plants can grow super tall, 3 meters in height. They can get pretty dense. You can see how dense they are in these pictures. It really makes it difficult for any light to get in there and, help any other type of plants grow. So we've also hosted different polls like this. Because we have a lot of staff members in the Sault Ste. Marie area, we do a lot of public outreach events like this to get people involved. So we have a lot of experience running these types of, plant polls and community events. So if there's ever anything that you need any kind of advice when you're trying to start your own, or you ever need information on what's happening in your area, feel free to reach out and we can kind of help with that. And really here, all these pictures, you can see how much support we've had in the past, how big the collaboration goes, how needed collaboration is. It really is a team effort to help prevent and manage invasive species. So reaching out to partners, reaching out to community members is always a great idea. And that's it for this presentation. And I have one more coming up right after this. But yeah, feel free to pop any questions in the chat. I can answer them or email me anytime.
Thank you, Maddie, for highlighting the crucial role that community science plays in early detection and rapid response. And Maddie will now take us through a second success story focused on the eradication of Asian longhorn beetle in the GTA. Over to you, Maddie.
Thanks, Sharon. Hopefully no one's sick of hearing my voice just yet. I have one more presentation. Like Sharon said, all about emerald ash borer. Asian longhorn beetle. Just get my zoom back up. Sorry, 1 second here. Share my screen. Okay, should be ready to rock. Okay, so we really wanted to highlight Asian longhorn beetle today because it's a really good news story. Invasive species can tend to be an overwhelming problem, but with Asian longhorn beetle, we caught the problem relatively early, managed it quickly. So it's a good case study to show the impacts of collaboration and early detection. Before we get into the history of Asian longhorn beetle in Canada, let's first introduce the species itself. So this beetle is a wood-boring beetle from China and Korea that infests a variety of hardwood trees. Asian longhorn beetle has a history of making its way over to North America and has been intercepted in both Canada and the United States. There's been adults and larvae found in the past during routine inspections of things like, and just any kind of goods coming into Canada. There've been inspections, and these interceptions have been found by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and by the Canada Border Services Agency. So even though we have lots of people keeping an eye out and trained to look for invasive species like this, sometimes they get kind of through anyways. So there have been a few cases of established populations in Canada and the US. There are, sorry, here, I'll go to this one here. I'll kind of get into what's happening in Canada in a bit. But this is an overview of what's happening in the United States with their National Asian Longhorn Beetle Program. So all of the blurbs in green that we see are places where it's been eradicated. There's been really successful attempts to get rid of the beetle in those areas. And the areas in red are where there's still Asian longhorn beetle and where there's still plans underway to try and manage those areas. Asian longhorn beetle have several different host trees that they rely on for survival and reproduction, but some of their favorites seem to be maple, willow, poplar, and birch. These trees are really important to us and our ecosystems here. Maple trees specifically, as you know, really important tree for Canada, big symbol for us Canadians. So if these beetles were to establish here, they could have a really big impact in a variety of ways. It could really put these trees at risk. We do have a few native lookalikes here in Canada. And this is probably one that's most commonly confused with Asian longhorn beetle. It's the native white spotted Sawyer beetle. And it looks super similar to Asian longhorn beetle on first glance, especially if you're a bit further away. Maybe you can't make out the details. If you happen to be close enough to the insect where you can make out its features, you'd be able to see that white spotted Sawyer beetle has a very prominent white spot on the base of the wing cover. And you won't see this with Asian longhorn beetle. White-spotted soil beetle also has a more pitted, textured body, whereas Asian longhorn beetle, they're more shiny, smooth, and they're black as opposed to brown. If you can't make out any of those details, maybe you're too far away, you can kind of look at their behavior to tell the difference between them. So the native white-spotted soil beetle usually prefers conifer trees, whereas Asian longhorn beetle prefers those deciduous trees like maple. This is a little overview of their life cycle. So they start out as eggs, which then turn into larvae. The larvae will get bigger over time and feed under the bark. Then they'll pupate in the spring and eventually turn into adults. The cycle will just kind of repeat itself, and how fast the insect moves throughout these stages really depends on a variety of factors, like the climate, for example, like where you are in the world. So in the North America and Canada, US, we think that Asian longhorn beetle takes about 1 to 2 years to complete this life cycle, but in colder climates like in Northern Europe, it can take longer, like 3 years. This is a better view of those eggs that they produce. So the adults will actually chew a little depression in the bark to lay its eggs. So the egg is all, nestled in and protected. These little white eggs is what they look like. They're super small. They take about 1 to 2 weeks to hatch. Those eggs will turn into the larvae that we see in the top left photo. The larvae start out small and get bigger as they feed. While they're feeding, they're actually creating tunnels under the bark and throughout the different layers of the tree. So when these larvae grow, when they're fully grown, they'll pupate, which we see in the top middle and top right photos. When that process is complete, they'll look like the adults in the bottom photos. So the adults will actually chew their way out of the tree, and they'll typically stay pretty close to that tree and feed on the twigs, the leaves, younger bark before reproducing and starting that life cycle over again. You'll likely see these oviposition pits and exit holes on an infested tree. So the oviposition pits are where the adults have chewed into the bark before laying an egg. That's where they're placing their egg to try and protect it, create its own little nook in the tree. The exit holes are where the adults emerged from the tree. So these adults create some pretty large round holes in the tree that can easily, fit a pen or pencil. And they're not always perfectly circle. A lot of them are, but I mean, depending on the angle that they come out of the tree, it might not always be a perfect circle. This is some of the damage on the outside and inside of a tree caused by Asian longhorn beetle. So even though those exit holes are quite large, it can be tricky to spot when there's just a few, when it's an early infestation. When a tree is, newly attacked, they may only have a few exit holes. They may be hiding the tree canopy too, where it's hard to see. This picture on the left here is a tree that's been heavily infested, though, with the beetle for several years. Even though Asian longhorn beetle can fly, they tend to stick around and lay eggs in the same tree that they emerge from as adults. So in severe cases, you'll see trees that are absolutely covered in egg-laying sites and exit holes. This is probably a case where people weren't monitoring trees and just went ignored or unnoticed for several years. So if you're out and about, regularly check different host trees for signs and symptoms. You likely won't see something like this. Again, you'll probably see something like a few exit holes if it's like a freshly infected tree, but it is super important to monitor the health of trees regularly. On the right, we see what's happening inside the tree. So this is a cross section of a maple trunk, and we can see the tunnels that these larvae make when feeding and the path the adults make when they're trying to leave the tree. So when you have this sort of severe damage, it becomes very difficult for the tree to, grow and survive. It also changes the structural integrity of the tree, so it can become more of a hazard for us as well, and for wildlife. There are a few other things you can look for when monitoring for Asian longhorn beetle. So you may see some bark cracking or missing bark from larval feeding. You may also notice some adults feeding on the twigs and foliage, which could result in twig and leaf mortality. Sawdust and frass could be seen around the tree base, cracks in the bark between branches, things like that. You may also see some thinning crowns, dead branches, yellowing of the foliage, premature leaf drop, things like that, just signs that the tree is in stress. Another thing to look for is that foamy or frothy sap at recent egg sites. The tree oozes the sap in response to the new wound. So it's a tiny wound, but still a wound, so the tree will ooze some sap. So you can sometimes notice that. It'll also sometimes attract, other insects like butterflies or bees or wasps. So Asian longhorn beetle can travel over short and long distances. It can travel locally on its own by flying. They can travel, kind of fly short distances in search of a new host, but they typically don't go further than, I think, about 800 meters. They're pretty large beetles, so it takes a lot of energy for them to fly. That's typically why we see trees that are, continuously reinfested. If you do see them fly, it'll probably look like they're struggling. Their hard wings cause them to fly a bit awkwardly at weird angles. They tend to rely on human activity to spread over longer distances. So they can hitchhike in untreated wood packaging material like, pallets and crates. They can also be found in firewood and transported that way. No surprise, talked about firewood a few times already. These beetles are also quite strong, so they can hold on really well to things like cars. They can hitchhike. So as I mentioned before, we did have an Asian longhorn beetle detection in Canada. We did have it here present for a few years. Overall, it's a good news story because it was successfully eradicated, but just because it's gone now doesn't mean it can never come back. That's why we want to do training and other events like this, just to kind of increase awareness, get more eyes on the ground monitoring. So I just wanted to go over the timeline briefly to kind of outline why Canada was so successful with their eradication plans. So in 1992, that's when we had the first interception in Canada during routine inspection of imports. A few years later, the beetle was detected in Chicago, and the CFA performed a pest risk analysis in response to this detection. So it was actually found in New York prior to this Chicago event, but the fact that it was then found in Chicago means that it was spreading. So the Canadian Food Inspection Agency really wanted to figure out the likelihood of it continuing to spread and coming into Canada. In 1999, the CFA expanded surveillance beyond the ports of entry and initiated some formal field surveys. They also developed an emergency response plan, which became really important in the overall response. In 2002, heat treatment and fumigation for wood products begins to be implemented as a preventative measure. So really thinking about ways we can prevent the spread and the arrival of the beetle. In 2003, it was detected in Toronto, Ontario. In 2013, another breeding population was detected outside of the Toronto-Vaughan regulated area. And then in 2020, Asian longhorn beetle was deemed eradicated from Canada. So there are two key activities or resources that were developed in Canada prior to that first initial detection that were really critical in that 2013 response. So for one, we already started increasing surveillance in the high-risk areas. So people were already getting trained on what to look for and what to do if they came across the beetle. The second resource was the development of an emergency response plan. So we had plans in place that outlined the options, the roles, responsibilities, things like that. So everybody kind of knew what was going on, who was doing what. Having this type of plan in place for when Asian longhorn beetle arrived was super helpful in getting everyone on the same page. We kind of learned to do this from emerald ash borer. So when it was first, found, we didn't really have any response plans made. We didn't know what it was, what to do. So it spread quite quickly. But we did learn that, use that as a learning opportunity, develop some response plans for Asian longhorn beetle, and having those types of pre-established plans really did help for rapid responses and successful management. So let's get into the Ontario detections. So in 2003, Asian longhorn beetle was detected by a member of the public. This person was at work and actually just found the live adult beetle on their vehicle. The person who found the beetle gifted it to their supervisor. I'm not sure why, maybe the supervisor really liked insects, but nonetheless, gave it to this person as a gift. The supervisor ended up bringing the beetle home because they thought it could be a really cool addition for their child's science project. So when they started Googling it, trying to find out more, they found messages from the United States about the importance of reporting the sighting and about the importance of the invasiveness of this beetle. Thankfully, this person reported the beetle, gave it to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, who then, sent it to the lab, did some tests, and confirmed it was Asian longhorn beetle. It only took a few days to get confirmation from the CFA. So the beetle was brought to them September 4th. And then only 4 days later are when the results came back. It was a very high priority pest. So it was important to get a positive detection, confirmation from the lab. And this really initiated a very large collaborative rapid response. Like I said, there was already an emergency response plan in place. So the CFA started initiating actions quite quickly, and it was a big effort, CFA led, but there was a lot of other groups that were involved and led their own initiatives as well. So some of these first activities were to evaluate the site and survey the area to really figure out the extent of the problem and how it likely got here in the first place. So while they were doing these types of evaluations, they found about 50 trees with extensive tree damage right in the initial area. Some were infested for so long that the trees had actually died. The surveys continued, and as they started looking more at the surrounding properties, they found about 500 trees directly affected by the beetle. Some of these trees had close to 300 exit holes. That's what the one tree that I showed in the previous slides with all those different exit holes, that was one of the trees that they found in this area. So there were some pretty intense infestations. I should note too that there were no long-range attractants or trapping technique that could really target Asian longhorn beetle exclusively. So all of the survey work and mapping was really done through visual inspection. So this would have taken a lot of time and work, a lot of personnel involved, a lot of partners. They also tried to figure out how Asian longhorn beetle got to the area while doing the site evaluations. So they found the presence of wood crates, they found pallets, and they found tree stumps on that property that had the initial detection. They did find out that the business had a history of receiving imports from China. So untreated wood is likely the pathway of spread that brought Asian longhorn beetle here in the first place. And it had likely been here for several years prior to that first report. Once they had all the information together, they determined that eradication was the best path forward. So they established quarantines and they ended up removing nearly 30,000 trees. Everything happened really quickly. So the infestation was found in September and trees were being cut down by November. So just a few months. And that's a huge amount of trees to handle in that short period of time. When the trees were removed, they're also documenting the species of trees that they took out, the size of those trees, signs, and locations of beetle attacks to really learn as much as we can about Asian longhorn beetle in the Canadian context. All those trees were also chipped according to phytosanitary protocols. It looked at the time like all this work paid off because with 5 years of negative surveys, it was deemed eradicated in 2013. But that relief, that kind of like, hooray, we did it, was unfortunately short-lived because Asian longhorn beetle was found again only 4 months later nearby in Mississauga. Thankfully, people knew what to do. They just went through it not too long ago at this point. So similar procedures were followed. And in the end, about 8,000 trees were removed and chipped in this case. After a lot of work and 5 additional years of consecutive surveys, consecutive negative surveys, it was declared eradicated again in 2020, and it's still eradicated now as of 2025. So what are some of the results of rapid response? We do have continued annual monitoring of Asian longhorn beetle, and there have been no new detections of the insect. Like I said, still deemed eradicated, and a lot of trees were saved from this insect damage in urban, natural, and working forests because we got it when we did. We still had to remove a ton of trees. There was still a lot of damage and work and restoration that needed to happen, but it could have been even worse if we didn't act fast. This map just shows that Asian longhorn beetle is still deemed eradicated. These are CFA's survey sites from this past year. They look at just over 1,500 sites, almost 1,600 sites across Canada, which you can see in the green triangles there. A large chunk of those sites are in Ontario. They have just over 600 sites this past year in 2024 alone. So they haven't found any signs or symptoms of Asian longhorn beetle. So right now it's looking good. But like I said, just because it's gone doesn't mean it can ever come back. So it's really important to monitor trees and keep an eye out for Asian longhorn beetle. There's some really good resources on Asian longhorn beetle if you want to learn more. We have a ton of information on the Invasive Species Center's website and through our training program, for example. But here are a few external resources that are also really great if you want to check them out. So on the left is a training guide that was developed and published by the Great Lakes Forestry Centre at Natural Resources Canada. And then there's also a paper published by a number of really great authors that outlines Canada's response to the Asian longhorn beetle detection. And it goes through the entire history, response, and a lot of awesome detail if you want to learn more there. And I think that's completely it for me now. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can type them out in the chat. And like I said before, feel free to email me anytime.
Thanks again, Maddie. To conclude this session, let's welcome back Monica for her talk on invasive plant removals, tips for success, and additional resources. Over to you, Monica.
Awesome, thank you. So this next presentation, I'm going to be speaking on invasive plant removals, tips and success, and additional resources. So when we talk about managing invasive species, it's easy to fall into a mindset of endless removal. So a constant battle with no clear end, but taking time to define what success actually means for your project can change everything. So it allows you to set clear, realistic goals that are grounded in the specific context that you're working in. It helps you stay motivated, especially when progress feels slow or setbacks happen. Defining success, it also gives you a way to measure impact in meaningful ways, whether that's a return of a native plant, if it's more community engagement, or simply just feeling more connected to the land. Ultimately, it's about giving yourself and others permission to celebrate progress. And because this work is never just about removing plants, it's also about restoring relationships. So I have two images here that we're taking during my time as a stewardship lead. And these are just some examples of success to me. So I have an image of an eastern redbat that appeared roosting in one of our restoration sites. And this was unexpected and very rewarding and validating for myself and the team. And the image on the right there is a group of volunteers who actually came back a second year just because they were having a great time. And this is a photo that's showing them with some wheelbarrows. There's some garlic mustard in their wheelbarrows, and they were just about to race off with them. So success is not just one thing, it's many things rooted in place, people, and purpose. Success in invasive species work, like I said, it doesn't live in one place. It's shared between ecology, community, and personal growth. And that's what this circle represents. So on one side, we have ecological success. Maybe you've reduced the presence of a target invasive, or you've seen native species starting to come back. On another side, there is social or community success. So building relationships, empowering volunteers, educating others, and creating long-term stewardship. And then finally, there's personal success. So your own sense of purpose, connection, and curiosity. And this circle reminds us that even if we haven't eradicated a species completely just yet, our work is still meaningful. So progress in any of these areas is worth recognizing and celebrating. And depending on your resources, your goals, and your context, success might look different from project to project, and that's okay. This quote really captures something essential about community-based invasive species work. So Derek Stone says, people need to feel like what they're doing matters, that they are contributing to something bigger than the weed itself. Yes, we're removing plants, but more than that, we're creating a space where people can belong, where their actions have meaning, and where they feel a part of something greater than themselves. It reminds us that ecological success is only sustainable when people care deeply enough to keep showing up. And that care comes from connection. It's not just instruction. So building lasting momentum in invasive species work isn't just about getting the weeds out, like I've mentioned. It's about creating a space where people feel connected and inspired to return. Long-term engagement in invasive species work, whether in a park, on the job, or your own backyard, it really thrives when we shift the focus from just tasks to relationships. And that means nurturing how we connect with the land, with each other, and ourselves in the work. It starts by understanding personal motivations. Why are you here? Why are others? Some may be driven by environmental goals, some by community. Someone might be completing their high school community service hours. Others may be just a desire to learn. Acknowledging these goals helps shape experiences that are meaningful and inclusive. Sharing decision making, even in small ways, builds ownership. So this could be letting team members help set restoration priorities or simply checking in before each session to reflect on what's working. Learning shouldn't be a bonus, it should be embedded. So taking the time to observe, ask questions, or identify plants builds knowledge. It builds knowledge and it deepens curiosity. And over time, those small moments make the work more fulfilling. And progress often comes in slow, quiet forms. A cleared area staying clear, for example, a native species returning, a team member showing up again. Celebrating these small wins keeps that morale strong. And above all, success grows when there's a sense of place and purpose. So when we see ourselves as part of a living system and the work as part of something much more larger than weed removal. And in this photo here, you've probably been looking at it for quite some time as I'm explaining the side and wondering, what are they looking at? Um, and this is it right here. So this is a baby American toad. So again, it's just creating that space where curiosity is encouraged. It really does support that long-term engagement. So before any tools come out of the shed, we need to take time to read the land. This step is about slowing down and really paying attention. Where are the native species holding their own? Which areas seem disturbed, compacted, or otherwise open to invasion? Are there signs of historical clearing or soil disturbances that have left the area vulnerable? So all of these observations, they matter. In a 2011 study done on restoration outcomes, researchers Kentering and Adams emphasized how often poor project results stem from skipping this ecological reading. So when we start to map out where invasive species are most concentrated and importantly, where they are not, we get a picture of the ecosystem's pressure points. And even noticing what's thriving under pressure can teach us a lot. So for example, in the picture there, there's a very invasive periwinkle ground cover, and then I have in a circle there's sugar maple. Quick glance, you might not even notice that there is some sugar maple there, but this reinforces the idea of how important it is to slow down and read the landscape. But not just sugar maple, are there certain sedges or shrubs that are surprisingly resilient? That may give us some restoration clues. And in this stage, we're not just identifying the invasive species, we're learning how the system has been shaped, what stories it tells, and how it might begin to shift again. And so once we understand the lands, we can start choosing where to focus our energy and just as importantly, where not to. So working with intention means placing your effort where it can actually make a difference. The Bradley method, developed in Australia in 1960s, is a great example of this philosophy. So it teaches us to begin in the least invaded areas, so those ecological strongholds, and expand outward slowly, giving nature a chance to recover with our support. So when we treat the healthiest areas as our anchors, we build restoration from the very beginning, not as an afterthought. And we also avoid the frustration that often comes with high maintenance sites. So whether you're a steward in a local park or you're managing a conservation area, having that long-term vision helps you stay grounded, and it also helps keep burnouts in check. So you're not just reacting to invasive species, you're moving towards something. So part of what makes invasive species work successful isn't just what we remove, but how we think ahead and how we move with intention. Building on the importance of having a long-term vision and understanding your landscape, The next critical step is prioritizing which invasive species to manage first. So it's essential to focus on those species that cause the greatest ecological harm. So it's those high impact invaders that disrupt native communities or alter ecosystem functions. So starting in the least invaded zones allows us to protect healthy native areas and increase our chances of long-term success. It's important to be realistic and target what's achievable given the resources and time available to you. Focusing on early detection and rapid response is also another important step, and that's something that we learned through Maddie and David's presentation. Leveraging provincial frameworks like the Ontario Invasive Species Act and local conservation authority lists like the Credit Valley Conservation Ranking list, that helps us to zero in on priority species, ensuring that efforts are strategic and coordinated. So when we combine these approaches, choosing our battles wisely, focusing where we can make a difference, and staying informed by local priorities, we build a foundation for sustainable invasive species management. Also, early detection and rapid response. I mentioned this earlier. It's one of the most effective strategies in invasive species management. By acting quickly and early, when a new invader is found, we can prevent it from becoming widespread and difficult to control. And this strategy doesn't just help to control invasive species, it increases volunteer motivation, it optimizes resources, and ultimately it moves us closer to the broader goals of ecosystem restoration and resilience. So understanding and applying these prioritization principles is really a key tip for success in any invasive species project. So once we figured out what we're managing and why, the next natural step is looking at how we do it. And that's where the best management practices come in. So when we talk about best management practices or BMPs, we're really talking about our go-to guide that helps us make smart, informed decisions in the field. They are species specific, so they give you a tailored strategy for what you're dealing with. BMPs often outline the best timing for control work, what treatment methods are most effective, and how to approach things like disposal or replanting. And they also touch on safety for both people doing the work and the surrounding environment. They are built from both science research and real world experience. So it helps us move forward with confidence. And of course, Maddie mentioned this as well, not every species has a published BMP. In those cases, we might turn to regional reports, collaborative conversations, or even our own observations to guide the work. Still, where they exist, BMPs provide a grounded foundation to build from. And when we talk about successful invasive species management, one of the most important, and sometimes I find it's overlooked tips is that removal is only half of the work. So once we clear an area of an invasive species, we're opening up that space both literally and ecologically. If we leave the ground bare, we're not just risking erosion or nutrient loss, we're also leaving an open invitation for invasive species to return. So native planting is a critical next step. Native species don't just cover the ground, they actively repair it. So the root system stabilizes the soil, it rebuilds native microbial networks, and helps shift the site back towards ecological balance. In fact, research by Dr. Gabriella and her team found that invasive plant roots are associated with less diverse microbial communities, which weakens the soil health over time. And what's fascinating about her study is that it's not just local population, it's anywhere the invasive species is found. So native plants, on the other hand, they help to restore that underground community, laying the foundation for healthier, more resilient landscapes. So if we're thinking about what success looks like in this work and how to set ourselves up for long-term impact, following up removal with thoughtful native planting isn't just a good idea, it's essential. So has anybody ever noticed how invasive monocultures kind of resemble an agricultural field? I have. So on the left here, we've got dog strangling vine, and then on the right is an image that we might all be familiar with. It's corn. So both different species, but visually and structurally, both are monocultures. And with that uniformity comes impact. So reduced biodiversity, disturbed soil structure, and weakened microbial communities. So in agriculture, there is increasing concern about soil degradation from repeated monocropping. And similarly, in our forests and natural spaces, invasions like dog strangling vine result in a kind of biological simplification that carries its own set of consequences. And Dr. Gabriella's work speaks to this, showing that invasive roots often support fewer beneficial soil microbes than native species. And the parallel is a reminder that whether we're in a farm field or a ravine, soil health matters, and diversity below the ground is just as important as above. So after looking at how monocultures, whether invasive plants or agricultural crops, can strip away diversity, it's worth asking, what can we learn from just other fields? So agriculture and gardening, for example, especially in their more ecological forms, they offer valuable tools for restoring soil and long-term invasive species management. So in both farming and gardening, there is sort of this golden rule: you don't leave the soil bare. Helen Attow in The Ecological Farm puts it simply: the best soil building plan is to keep roots in the ground at all times. But not just any roots, right? We've learned that we want the right kind of roots. So native roots, they have evolved alongside local soil life, feeding diverse microbial communities and supporting soil structure in ways invasive species simply don't. Studies show that living roots are constantly releasing exudates, which are sugars that feed beneficial fungi and bacteria, which in turn help plants thrive and soil heal. In contrast, research by Dr. Gabriella shows that the invasive plant roots actually decrease these microbial richness and disrupt these networks. So when we talk about replanting, it's not just about getting something into the ground. It's about putting back what belongs and what can support with recovery. And when it comes to restoring natural areas, sourcing native seeds and plants locally is key to success. But it's not just about picking anything labeled native. It's very important that you do read your plant labels carefully to make sure you're not buying nativars, for example. So these are cultivars or hybrids of native species bred mainly for appearance traits, which may not provide the same ecological benefits to wildlife and soil health as true natives. By choosing locally sourced true native plants from nurseries that specialize in regional species, you help to ensure that plants are adapted to your area's climate and ecosystem needs. And supporting these nurseries also encourages them to grow more native species, or at least to sell more native species, making it easier for everyone to access the right plants for restoration. And this thoughtful approach strengthens local genetic diversity and leads to healthier, more resilient ecosystems overall. So here I have a map that shows where you can find and buy native plants. So this is in Ontario here. The map itself, it can be found on the website In the Zone, which is a campaign hosted by both WWF and Carolinian Canada. Invasive species management is not a one-time effort. It's really a long-time journey that requires patience, persistence, and adaptability. Success comes from understanding your landscape deeply, prioritizing the right species, and restoring with native plants and seeds thoughtfully. Throughout this process, continuous monitoring allows you to adapt your approach as conditions change. And collaboration is key. So working alongside experts, volunteers, and the community multiplies your efforts and builds shared commitments. So now that we've explored the importance of long-term commitment and local success, let's shift into the kinds of resources that keeps our curiosity alive and helps us to stay engaged in the field. So we know invasive species work can be hard, it can be repetitive, and sometimes it can feel a little bit overwhelming. But the key to staying motivated is nurturing that sense of curiosity and also wonder in ourselves and others too. So bringing tools like a butterfly net, for example, or a handheld lens to turn, a routine removal day into a moment of discovery, it really feeds into that excitement of the work. And as we know, a GPS unit that can track our progress and help map where our efforts are having the most impact. Taking before and after photos, which I think we can all agree is one of the things we always forget to do, but it's so important. It creates a visual story of change. While species inventories and field notes, that lets you reflect on what's working or not. Um, Even something as simple as flipping through an ID guide or jotting down a new plant you might notice can really help to keep yourself and others learning. And these kind of tools don't just support the work, they keep it alive, interesting, and rewarding. So beyond the tools we hold in our hands, there are also tools that live in our pockets. It's those digital platforms that help to keep our curiosity alive and connect our work to something bigger. So whether you're new to the field or a seasoned naturalist, digital tools offers a meaningful way to turn everyday observations into real contributions to science. So apps like Seek help you to build ID skills over time, while platforms like Nature's Notebook lets you document seasonal changes in native and invasive species. So it's critical data that researchers and scientists, they use it. They use it to understand climate shifts and ecosystem health. Another fantastic resource or tool is SciStarter. So it's an amazing website. It opens doors to a wide range of projects that are happening. So it's anything from counting bees visiting your flowers to cloud monitoring to pollinator monitoring to plant health studies. There's a ton of different projects that are all being done across the world. Your observation and your notes, they don't just help you learn, they really do build a collective understanding of the natural world. And these tools are they're more than just engagement. Again, they're just about connecting individual efforts to those long-term ecological insights, which we all benefit from. And so we touched upon this earlier with reporting. So while our personal tools and curiosity, they help deepen our understanding, reporting what we find is just as important. So arguably, it's one of the easiest and cost-effective calls to action that anybody can do. It's important so the earlier that we can spot a species, the earlier we can manage or remove it. Reporting also allows us to map the distribution of invasive species across geographical boundaries, giving us the best holistic understanding. And the more reports that we do get, the more accurate it is. It also helps with selecting sites for management and outreach. It increases local knowledge of distribution, and it helps us to understand the movement of invasive species over time. Reporting also has the potential to influence policy. Right, so we use it when we're contracted to create invasive species strategic plans or management plans. And you can also use EdMaps to search for what invasive species have been reported within your area, just to help inform your management plans or choose areas that you may want to use for your next removal events, or just simply to know what invasive species to keep an eye out for on your property. So again, I mentioned this in my first presentation, but this is really a fantastic tool, the Grow Me Instead guide. So if you're looking at your own individual project at home and you need some information on what to plant in place in place of invasive species, this is definitely your go-to guide. And again, there's lots of available resources online on our website to help identify with species. Yeah, so this is the end of my slide here. But before I close it off, I just want to say, just to keep showing up, keep that curiosity going, and remember that success in this work grows over time, just like the ecosystems we're restoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, for those thoughtful and practical insights on making invasive plants management more strategic, community-driven, and sustainable. Now we can move into our third session of the day, horizon scanning, and let's welcome David back to the virtual stage to speak on priority pests that may pose a threat to forestry in Ontario. Over to you, David.
All right. So I'm gonna basically dive into a bunch of invasive species that are either here or on the horizon. Let me dive right into here. Okay, so Madison did a really good job of explaining to everyone what invasive species are. So essentially, just to sum up what she said before, they're a species that is not from our area. It's outside of its native range. It has to pose some sort of ecological, economic, or societal issue. Has to be a fast grower, lack natural resources, or have a lack of natural predators, and it has to target one of our native species. So this has already been touched on, but I really do find that this is a really good way to discuss sort of management and what priorities are in place for either preventing, eradicating, containing, or the long-term control of certain invasive species. So when we're talking about prevention, we're talking about stopping these invasive species from coming into Canada or coming back into Canada. Eradication is the rapid response and elimination of those invasive pests that were once found in Canada but now are not. Containment is the quarantine of an area that has established a population and it's no longer feasible to eradicate them, so we try to contain them, and it's the slow the spread containment put in place. Long-term control and management of invasive species is the most costly way of dealing with invasive species. And it's essentially if invasive species become a foothold, they get out of containment and they essentially go through Canadian forests, and that's not what we want to have happen, but there are some examples of those as well. So to dive into a little bit of invasive species that are on the horizon, and to talk about the invasive species that are on that invasive species curve, gives you some examples of how it works and go on from there. So spotted lanternfly, it's a leaf hopper that uses its sucking mouth parts in order to drain plants of nutrients. So its actual host is an invasive species, tree of heaven. But it also is known to go after multiple different other types of our native plants. So it goes after fruit trees. Grapevines is one thing that is really of concern because our not grape industry, but our vineyard industry and wine industry, it poses a big risk to that economically, as well as fruit trees down in the Southern Ontario region, but also, all over Canada where fruit trees are grown for crops. It also will go after our walnut trees and several of different other type of species. It's vectored through either human-assisted movement, so people may not know that these hitchhikers are actually hanging on to either uh, their campers, their vehicles. It could come on firewood, those kinds of things. So it can be vectored by human-assisted movement. There's several uh, um, detections on things like marine vessels, so cruise ships in the Atlantic provinces. Thankfully, they've been destroyed before the vessel actually reaches the mainland. But there's different types of ways that these types of very human-friendly insects, which is not a great term, but they tend to like to hitchhike and hop on and move with us humans as much as we do. They also can fly to different locations, but the biggest form of their movement is through different hitchhiking methods. So what you're looking for, signs and symptoms, could be the loss of tree vigor. So the trees tend to look sad looking. The leaves will look wilted. And also the development of a sooty mold. So these insects, what they do is they put their mouth parts into the tree. It's like almost like a straw. They slurp out the sap from the tree, and they essentially excrete this very um, high sugar excrement, and it falls on the ground, creating these like sooty mold bases of the tree. So the base of the tree looks black, looks gross, looks kind of dingy. So different management strategies are put in place. The spot it, snap it, catch it, report it is one of the big pushes in Canada. So if you were to see one, snap a picture of it, catch it, or squish it is the best way, and report it to a CFIA officer or any sort of reporting apps that may be around. There's chemical control in the USA. There's tree injections in order to prevent them from going into trees. But the US usually uses a lot of pesticides. Thankfully, it's not in Canada, so um, we haven't really gone into use of pesticides or anything like that. Other types of mechanical control is sort of scraping off the egg masses from if we see them. Tree bands, so that is essentially a sticky tape that goes around the trunk of a tree, and these leaf hoppers will crawl up the tree and get stuck on those traps there, and then removal of infested material is another way. So like we had said before, Tree of Heaven is one of the main hosts of this species here, and it is it's an invasive species as well. So removing that tree of heaven from woodlots is also a really good idea in order to prevent the spread of this invasive. And like you can see here, these are the egg masses here, and this is on two barks, but they're very difficult to see, and spotted lanternfly will really lay their eggs on anything possible. And so this is part of the species curve that we're trying to prevent from moving into Canada. Oh yeah, spotted lanternfly. It's pretty flashy, so compared to other invasives, they sort of side-eye the spotted lanternfly. Southern pine beetle is another one I wanted to talk about, prevention of moving into Canada. It's a large pest for the southern US states, as well as into Central America. And the worry is that with Canada not having such severe winters anymore, this Dendroctonus frontalis, the southern pine beetle, is slowly creeping north more and more and more. And so we want to prevent it from coming into Canada because it will infest all different types of pines. It can be moved through different types of migration or migration north, just slowly as is naturally allowed to move more north more freely with not harsh winters, being able to knock it back. But also it's a beetle that lives underneath the bark, and it will disrupt the flow of nutrients from the tree sap, essentially allowing the tree to trade nutrients through its root to shoot or shoot to root transmission of its normal tree functions. And so this beetle will interrupt and essentially girdle trees. This is a picture of the beetle down here, and it can be moved through infested material and its migration north. And as you can see, this is an iNaturalist capture, and it's pretty close to Canada. It's not found in Canada yet, but I think the more northern states are trying to prevent it from coming into their states as well. Certain signs you can find is yellowing crowns. You can see this from the air, exit holes, hardening of resin on the outer bark. It tends to look like popcorn. The resin that kind of gets exposed because the tree is trying to prevent the beetle from getting into it, so it produces this resin through the exit or entrance hole, and it will try and stop that. And so the resin tends to harden and it looks sort of like popcorn, as you can see here, kind of like popcorn. So some management for this one is definitely early detection. There are several traps networks set up by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, as well as the Ministry of Natural Resources and Natural Resources Canada, in order to prevent to monitor different species that might be along ports and things like that, and essentially promote. That way we can figure out what's coming into Canada. Mostly the Canadian Food Inspection Agency will do this type of work near ports and things like that. And then they'll detect have an early detection network, I should say, set up. So what we need to do is we need to promote healthy forests, because southern pine beetle tends to go after weakened trees. So we want to promote those types of healthy forests in our area. And so there's also biological controls. This checkered beetle here that sort of will go after and eat the beetles. So there are some native species that can control this, but we want to do prevention at all costs. Oak wilt is an example of an eradication. So in 2023, oak wilt was eradicated, was removed from 2 areas in Ontario, and it's a fungus species that's vectored through sap beetle transmission, as well as root-to-root transfer. And some early signs of it is the bark cracking, the leaf browning, and essentially early leaf drop, as well as the pressure pads. It has a pretty complicated life cycle in order to be transported from place to place. So it's not a fast moving fungus, but it is one that we want to stave off from coming into Canada. Here's a couple of the management techniques. So like I said, early detection. So this original infestation was detected from a arborist that was being consulted by a dead red oak, and that arborist was able to report it, and within a month and a half, the tree was removed and was buried, so that the infection can no longer go after any other trees. And so, and there's all different types of ways to prevent oak wilt from going on. The fungicidal treatments in the States have been kind of effective, but not really. And to prevent root-to-root transfer, the US in some locations that have very sandy soil has been using these vibratory plows, which are 6-foot long giant swords that essentially go into the ground and cut up any root grafts that have been made. So they stop that flow of nutrients. I don't know if you can't really use those types of plows on like rocky soil and stuff like that, but for oak savannas that are growing on sandy soils, that type of management is great. Madison had talked a lot about the eradication of Asian longhorn beetle. It was another species that was eradicated in the early 2000s, was found again in the 2010s, and the tree was removed again, so it was eradicated a second time, and they haven't been able to find any new occurrences into Canada since, which is great. So we talk about these last two species as eradications, and so once we have that eradication, we move back to prevention from coming into Canada. So this beetle, affects the hardwood of the tree. It goes after maples, poplars, birches, willows, and human movement through infested material and beetle flight from area to area is how this is vectored. And there's some great pictures Maddie showed earlier about the exit holes and the different types of oviposition pits as well. So early detection is really key for this one to reduce the spread, reduce the movement of infested material and firewood to stop it from going from place to place, and inspect packaging materials, another really good place. Sorry, not a place, but a really good way to reduce the spread. And continuum monitoring. So the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, does continuously monitor for this species. It's really good to note that a lot of people say that they see this beetle around. So to learn the differences between our native Sawyer beetles and the Asian longhorn beetle is really good. The native Sawyer beetles tend to have a white spot on their what's called a scutellum between what I like to say their shoulder blades, but essentially that white scutellum is a really good indication whether you have a white spotted Sawyer beetle or an Asian longhorn beetle. Beech leaf disease. This is something that went from sort of caught everyone in the forestry industry off guard because it was detected it was first noted that there was something wrong in 2012, and it wasn't till 2019, I believe, when the actual nematode was named. And so it was named by a scientist in Japan, and he's an expert in nematodes. And so by the time we actually figured out what was going on, this invasion had already started from Ohio and slowly spread and was found in Canada and has been moving rapidly throughout Ontario. So this is actually something that's in the containment group. So we want to try and contain this, and we're monitoring the spread. So this is a nematode-affected disease, and it essentially affects mostly saplings of beech, but it also can affect the large trees as well. And we're still investigating in how it's actually being vectored. So it could be through birds. They've done studies where they look at, different birds eating the beech shoots and ingesting the nematodes and spreading it through fecal matter, or they're looking at whether predatory mites have been feeding and then moving from there, whether they're insect vectored. So there's still ongoing research in order to find out how the Liedtke nematode is actually being moved from one place to another. These A and B, those are some images, some really nice fancy images from scanning electron microscope of the nematode. It's very, very tiny. And like I said, it creates these leathery type of bands on the beech leaf that actually disrupts the chloroplast creation of sugars, and it essentially wilts the leaves and makes the tree more susceptible to other diseases and things like that. So the prevention is to not prevent, or sorry, stop movement of infested material, and there's ongoing research in order to identify some of these movements. Hemlock woolly adelgid is another containment type of insect. So in the early 2010s, there were successful eradication of hemlock woolly adelgid in the Niagara region. However, in the just after COVID 2021, 2022, it was detected in several locations in the Niagara region, and in 2023 or 2022 and 2023, it was detected in Hamilton, as well as other locations throughout the Niagara region, and then one other location in the Cobourg area as well. So this is a very tiny sap-sucking insect. So it's a very, very smaller version of this is the same family group as the spotted lanternfly. So this is an adelgid, which is an aphid-like insect that infests and kills hemlock trees. So it essentially, as the crawler stage, you can see the crawler here in the little picture with its little legs, and it will crawl, move around and try and find a location. Sometimes it does get on birds and it will go from place to place, migratory birds. And it essentially finds a needle, one of the foliage needles, and it will essentially set up shop and put its sucking mouth parts into the base of the needle and drain the needle of its nutrients that it's getting from the tree. So this tends to look like a sort of discolored foliage. So the foliage tends to not look green anymore. It tends to turn this black, or not black, but like a gray color. And you'll start to see the crown die back as well. And you'll see the woolly masses. These little woolly masses on the base of the needles, they'll start to sort of float around in the spring, and they'll fall to the ground and things like that. And so it's found in Nova Scotia as well as in Ontario. So management techniques that you can avoid the movement of these hemlock woolly adelgids. There's a great management guide out there. So if you want to look that up, it's available online. So don't move infested material, avoid placing bird feeders near hemlocks just to prevent the birds from going into those areas. Detection of the woolly mass can be found in the spring and fall. Clean yourself after if you've entered into a hemlock woolly adelgid infested area. Usually having a lint roller with you is great and handy in order to get rid of, wipe your clothing down to get rid of those possible hitchhikers. Cut down of infested trees to prevent them from moving around. Also, there's chemical control that use of pesticides that the United States has been using so far, and is being tested out in some places in Canada. Also, there's biological control releases. So there's two different types of beetles and one type of fly that's being released. The fly is being released in the US, and they're discussing about the beetle releases in Canada. The beetle is actually from the West Coast, because there is a hemlock woolly adelgid in the West Coast, and it has evolved with the West Coast elms, and so it's not one of the infected nursery stocks that came to the eastern side. So that's a whole other group over there. However, that is native to the West Coast. Emerald ash borer is another insect. Vince talked about it today. And this beetle is very, very mobile. It moves very quickly and it can be moved by humans a lot of the time. Ash is a great firewood and a lot of people tend to use it. It's moved throughout Canada pretty rapidly as well as through the States. It's almost in 35 different states across the US, and it can be found in Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, or not Newfoundland, sorry, Nova Scotia, and it was recently found in Vancouver. And it affects all species of ash, and you can sort of detect it by branch flagging, crown thinning, epicormic shoots, woodpecker feeding, as well as bark cracking. So down at the bottom here, that's an image of a insect emergence hole, as well as in the red is a woodpecker feeding hole. And so we're pivoting from the control to the long-term control side of things. The management side of things is mostly early detection. So if they're finding it in the locations, how are they managing to control it? Usually by removing the infested material, cutting down the trees that are infested, not moving firewood, but also the use of biological control agents. So the use of biological control is sort of not a silver bullet in order to get rid of it, but it's mostly used to manage the emerald ash borer after its initial wave. So there's 3 different types of species. This is a form of Tetrasticus right here, which is the small wasp that they've been used in order to kill the emerald ash borer. And I found this was really cool. I found this year, and this was an emerald ash borer larva. You can see it would have been in the gallery, and this is infested by the Tetrasticus planapicii, and you can see all the little parasitoids that essentially killed the emerald ash borer and is now pupating, and they're going to emerge. So you can tell that the Tetrasticus and the other types of parasitoids are actually doing a really good job of starting to build up a population in the emerald ash borer population. If you want to see more about this, this is a great YouTube webinar given by Chris McCory. It's a really good presentation on that. To move forward into the long-term management and control side of things, invasive species that we might have on the horizon coming up again. We had a really big outbreak in 2021 or 2020 and 2021 of the spongy moth. It was going after almost 1.7 million hectares of defoliated forests, so which is way bigger than has ever been previously found in Ontario. And like I said before, it will go after almost 250 different plants that it can feed on. There are several different ways it can vector. It can vector through the wind. The small caterpillars can float on the wind because they have such small hairs that essentially act as little parachutes, so they can go from place to place. And they'll essentially strip trees, primarily of oak, but they'll go after other things as well. And you can detect them from the brown egg masses and tree defoliation. Different types of management depends on different types of the life stages. So here's a circle of the life stage, and it actually talks about the different types of management strategies. So during the larval feeding stages, biological pesticides, BTK, or the burlap trap method is a great way to manage. but it won't work in the pupal stages, and it won't work in the adult stages. So you have to make sure you're gearing your treatment options to the different life stages. So you can scrape off the egg masses, which you can see at the bottom. You can handpick the pupa, which you can see over on the right-hand side. And put them into soapy water. You can do that with the caterpillars as well. There's also biological pesticides that are able to be used during the feeding. So the use of BTK, or you can, or there are other biological control agents that are actually out there. So there's a wasp that goes after the eggs. There's a fungus that essentially dehydrates the caterpillars, and then there's also a virus that will go through the caterpillar population, and it will kill the population. So in the bottom here, you can see the three different types. There's the parasitoid, the fungal, as well as the virus. And I'm almost finished here. So great ways to connect with scientists is through iNaturalist or EdMaps or multiple different types of reporting apps. iNaturalist, I know there's a lot of entomologists and scientists that actually routinely use iNaturalist as their reporting tools as well. It's great to have maps in order to see where these species are, as well as they also help with identification, and same with EdMaps as well. EdMaps is a great program for reporting any type of invasive species that you might have. It goes directly to a group of people that will send it off to different scientists in order to identify your pictures that you have, and they can determine whether it's an invasive species or something else that you might not want on your property. So it's always great to report these different types of invasives. So that's it for today. I wanted to thank you very much for all the awesome presentations, and I'll hand it back over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, David, for giving us a look ahead at potential invasive threats and the importance of proactive monitoring. This brings us to our final portion of the day, the discussion and Q&A session. If you have any questions, please submit it in the Q&A pod, or if you'd like to ask your question out loud, feel free to use the raise hand feature and we'll unmute you. We also have a post-webinar survey for the participants to fill out. Just 1 second. So there are 2 questions in total. You will need to scroll down to see the second question. I know one of the participants, Sean, he has a question. So I'm going to unmute him at this moment. Hi, Sean.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I just had a question about identifying potential future invasive plants, particularly with eastern redbuds. So I've read a lot of books and talked to a lot of ecologists locally about the history of redbuds, and they would agree that, at least from all the sources that I've interacted with, that Cercis canadensis is not actually historically native to mainland Canada, except for some that were found on Pelee Island, which are arguably human planted. But because of that historical and geographical separation of the plant from Canada or Southern Ontario, I I guess wanted to ask about, or I'm concerned about how aggressively they spread. I've noticed a lot of woodlands where there's a redbud nearby and they've just sort of carpeted the entire area, almost akin to garlic mustard in their density. I've also worked with botanical gardens removing eastern redbuds around endangered species like American chestnut because again, they were sort of swarming the whole area and actually impairing the growth of the young chestnut trees. And I guess my question is, moving forward, is there any sort of discussion existing about monitoring or sort of understanding the relationship of redbud with local ecology that perhaps never evolved with its presence in the first place, especially because there's so much sort of perception. I would call it misperception, but possibly about it being native here. So everyone sort of purports it as being a native plant. Anyway, so long-winded, but I'm just curious about the process of identifying its status and whether there is sort of an investigation into that, or if that's just something that's gonna eventually just sweep the southern Ontario as people plant it everywhere.
Yes, I'm
Thank you,
online.
Sean. David, are you gonna chime in?
Monica, did you want to chime in on that? Or
Yeah, sure, I can. That's a very yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Sean. That's very interesting. Um, I haven't done too much research on redbud, so I'm not too familiar with yeah, the new research on it. But the invasive exotic species ranking list is going to be coming out pretty soon. The last one that, well, the one that we currently have is dated. I think it's 2002. So I'd be interested to see if it does end up on that list. And yeah, I think there's definitely a lot more discussion that should be, had around red buds, and especially if that's something that we're seeing on the landscape that it is becoming a little more aggressive. But yeah, that's definitely something that I think is important to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, am I still audible or
Yes,
am
Yeah,
you
you
are.
are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just know that like Fabaceae globally are one of the top invasive families of plants, and so like black locust and stuff like that,
Hmm.
and honey locust in South America. But so that's where it kind of started with the concern. But then also RBG were removing it as an invasive plant because it was planted there historically as well. But is there somewhere is there like a network to reach out to about starting this sort of conversation, or because I just feel like everywhere I
Hmm.
go, everyone's like, no, it's native, and I'm like, no, it's not. And who do I like? How do I reach out to people like professionals to start like a dialogue about this, about whether it's going to end up being a massive issue in 20 years, if there is one actually.
Yeah. And so you mentioned RBG, they were removing it. So the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, I know that they have, I believe it's a program um, where they do have a group or a network of um, gardens, like public gardens, that help to track if a species is becoming invasive. And so RBG would, I think, be part of that network as well. So if it is a species that other public gardens are noticing, then that's something that they're keeping track of and reporting. So I think that might be a good resource for you, is the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, just to get in touch with them.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. I think we've answered all the questions for now. For our participants, if you have any additional questions after today's session, please don't hesitate to reach out and we'd be happy to connect you with the speakers. And before we wrap up, just a quick reminder that the session is being recorded and the recording will soon be available on our website under the Open Access e-lecture page. And for the ISA certified arborists, you may be eligible to receive continuing education units for attending today's session. To request credit, please email electures@cififc.org with your full name and your ISA certification ID. And thank you again to all our speakers and to everyone who joined us today. We hope you found today's training informative and valuable. We look forward to seeing you at future CIF and Invasive Species Center events. All right. Bye, everyone.